And there it is. We're live. Okay, so let me just begin. We're maybe a minute late. Welcome back to the Environment and Transportation Committee. I'm the chairman, Kumar Barve. I expect my vice chair to show up after he has testified on a bill in a different committee. Couple of announcements. First of all, we're going back to the old timer regimen where you see the little square blue timer. Our staffer who ordinarily ran the other timer, which was the one that we had on the floor, he's sick today, so we're going back to what we'd started out with. And again, if you, for those of you who are testifying or members of the committee, you can make it smaller by clicking the little double lines right to the right of the blue box where the timer is and just sliding it all the way, sliding it over to the left. So it is possible to minimize the size of the timer. As usual, witnesses will get 2 minutes, sponsors will get 4 minutes. So if you're a sponsor, Sandy, you'll see the timer's at 2 minutes, it'll click down to 0, and then it'll go back up to 2, and that means you'll have 2 minutes remaining, which is 2 + 2 = 4. That's why we do it that way. So the other
I'll do my best not to look at it.
Okay. No, I want you to stare at it and only it. You know, also, because she's running the meeting by herself, try not to text Trish. She's basically flying slow today. If you have suggestions or recommendations, please wait until after the public hearing. And with that, let's go straight to House Bill 49. Delegate Rosenberg, you and I think most, if not all, of your witnesses are in the waiting room. So, Delegate Rosenberg, take it away. You've got 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. As this committee well knows, our landlord-tenant law imposes requirements on both the landlord to provide a decent, safe, affordable housing, the tenant to pay the rent and to maintain and not to do damage to the property. One aspect of that requirement is lead safety. The committee, as part of the major lead reform many years ago, required the landlord to meet standards every time the property is rented. And so it must be tested. However, current law says that whether or not that test has been met, whether or not the property qualifies, is not an issue of fact. This legislation, by virtue of the new software, new system that the Department of the Environment will be implementing in October, solves that problem because that information will be available to all parties online. So this bill would remove the existing requirement or the existing exemption, that is, that it is not an issue of fact as to whether or not the landlord has complied with the law in this regard. Remove that exemption from the law and provide that parties would be able to access and use the information on the new system that I believe there's in the record, the letter from Secretary Grumbles that the department is on time to implement that by October of this fall. The bill, in recognition of that, even though the department says that at this time they are on target and on schedule, the bill would not take effect until January 31 of next year, so that if there is still a problem, or if there is a problem at that time, we would be able to pass emergency legislation next year to extend the deadline further if needed. I would also add that the bill extends from 1 day to 10 days, the time that both parties have to obtain additional information or witnesses in an eviction case. So this is a bill that the sides have fought over in the past. There now is agreement except for the effective date, but I would hope, and I'm sure that that's something that the committee and the affected parties can resolve. So would urge a favorable report on House Bill 49 so that when an eviction is sought, whether the landlord, whether the property owner has complied with the lead safety requirements in the law, whether that would now be an issue of fact by virtue of this new software system. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for the sponsor? I have a question. So your bill basically says that it would be an issue of fact in eviction cases after the software has gone into effect. You know, part of the problem has been, and maybe I didn't hear this, I was attending to some stuff here. It's not just it's a communication problem between the judiciary and the Department of the Environment. Is the judiciary completely on board with complying with this?
I don't want to speak for them. I would assume, though, that if they have not sent a letter, a more recent letter, there is a past letter that they've sent, and I assume you have that, and I don't want to misstate it. And they certainly know how this process works, so that they have a problem with the bill as it's before us now. They certainly know how to communicate with the committee.
Yeah, I don't see anything here. Maybe there's, okay, well, that answers my question. Any other questions for the sponsor? Okay, seeing no, well, hold on. There's somebody in the, no, okay. All right, seeing none, we'll go to the witnesses. The first, I believe, is Karen Wabecki, then Zuffer Shah, then Ruth Ann Norton, and Wesley Stewart, followed by favorable with amendments, Aaron Greenfield. So let's start with Karen. Karen, welcome back to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. My name is Karen Waback. I'm an attorney with the Homeless Persons Representation Project. HPRP is a nonprofit civil legal aid organization that provides legal representation to people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness at no cost. And as part of our work, HPRP regularly represents tenants in failure to pay rent cases and other landlord-tenant matters in Baltimore City. We've submitted written testimony, and I'm here to testify today in support of House Bill 49. As Delegate Rosenberg mentioned, under current law, a landlord's non-compliance with the lead law is not an issue of fact at trial, meaning that tenants cannot raise it as a defense in rent court, and a judge cannot dismiss a case that has been brought by a property owner who is flagrantly violating the lead law. And HB 49 would change this. The experience of a client of ours, I'll call her Charmaine, is illustrative. HPRP met Charmaine in rent court after her landlord had filed a complaint alleging that she was behind on the rent. When Charmaine had moved into the property in 2015, it had passed the lead inspection, and MDE had issued a full risk reduction certificate. Just 4 years later, however, in 2019, MDE issued a notice of defect to the owner of the property, noting that there was peeling, chipping, and flaking paint throughout the home, as well as structural defects. Charmaine lived in the property with her minor child and her elderly mother, and the condition of the property clearly posed a risk to their health and safety. Nevertheless, this information could not be raised defensively on Charmaine's behalf. So we urge a favorable report from the committee on HB 49. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Zuffer Shah, then Ruth Ann Norton, then Wesley Stewart in that order. Zuffer, you're next.
Well, thank you, Chairman Barvey and members of the committee. My name is Zuffer Shah from the Human Right to Housing Project at the Public Justice Center. And you all have heard our testimony on this proposal for several years. Since 2016, there was a summer study on this proposal in part, and thereafter compromise legislation in 2017. This policy passed in different iterations in the House in 2017 and again in 2018. And the merits of the bill remain clear. Maryland must do better by its renter households than to allow unlawfully operating landlords who lack a valid lead inspection certificate to be using the courts to squeeze folks for money or otherwise displace them. As was said, the current law requires landlords on their failure to pay rent complaint to state that they comply with the lead risk and housing law via their inspection certificate. But year after year, just as Ms. Wabeck just testified, lawyers for tenants in district court see fictitious or outdated information provided to the court. And these fabrications are given safe harbor because of the provision that Delegate Rosenberg spoke to, which is that the information about the lead certificate shall not be an issue of fact at trial. So what does HB 49 not do? It doesn't create trials about lead tests or lead injuries, nor does it perversely keep a family locked into a dangerous home. It just requires that a plaintiff landlord show their clean hands when they use the courts by bringing the valid lead inspection certificate to court to show a judge as an element of their burden. And so
we're trying to reach you on.
I'm sorry.
I don't
To
know
carry
what
that burden.
Go ahead.
Okay, so to carry the burden under HB 49, a plaintiff does not actually need to doesn't require access to a database. They need to access their records kept in the ordinary course of business, and every lawfully operating landlord should have that valid lead inspection certificate and provide a copy to a tenant. Now, that said, in the spirit of compromise, PJC does not object, as we have in prior sessions, to setting the database contingent effective date on this bill. I just emphasize as a closing note that under the language in the bill, the effective date is January 22nd, 2022. But if there is no standing up of a new database that provides access to lead inspection certificates online, then there's a pretty harsh result, which is that the entire law becomes null and void. And that just means that we'll be back for a 7th year with the same bill, potentially as an emergency bill, as Delegate Rosenberg mentioned. And that concludes my testimony. Public Justice Center urges a favorable report on the bill.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry about that interruption. No idea what that was. Ruth Ann Norton, are you in the waiting room?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. This is Wes Stewart on behalf of Ruth Ann and the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative.
Okay, go ahead. Okay,
Yes.
You've got 2 minutes, right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. GHHI is here today in support of House Bill 49. The Clean Hands Bill that was passed by this committee in the legislature has improved compliance rates in rental housing and helped clean up our housing stock. But as Delegate Rosenberg mentioned, it had one key deficiency, which was where the issue of the compliance is before the court, the judges have been reluctant to rule. They feel like their hands are tied. And how that plays out in court is when we represent tenants or when tenants there in court, if there's no number listed, the judges are reluctant to sua sponte dismiss the case. They're not sure they have the authority. What we find is the number is actually an antiquated number from a prior certificate. It's a certificate number for a different property, or in some cases, it's just a number. And what happens is when there's a number in that box, the judges will not dismiss. And so where the issue of compliance is raised, this would give judges the ability to hear evidence, have the owner present their valid certificate if there is one, and then also gives them the authority to dismiss cases where there is no registration, there's no compliance. And so what has not happened is this has not at all created any delays that were actually as part of the 2000 bill that was put in because there was a concern raised by property owners. There would be just continuous delays in rent court. That's not materialized. We didn't expect it to, but this would clarify the fact that judges have the authority, they can hear evidence, and just want to make sure that the committee is aware we don't anticipate nor have we seen any kind of substantial delays that would be caused by this bill being passed. So for those reasons, we ask for your support of this bill and its passage.
Thank you very much. Any questions, witnesses, or the drill that apparently is running right now? Okay, there appear to be no questions. Thank you very much. Let me go to Aaron Greenfield, signed up favorable with amendments. Aaron, you out there?
I am, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good afternoon. I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association, favorable with amendments. You've heard this bill before. in previous sessions. I want to thank the sponsor and the advocates. We did over the interim have time to discuss this bill and address really our two ongoing concerns. One in particular, Mr. Chairman, which you highlighted, is the accessibility of this lead registration compliance and accreditation database, which, as we know from the Maryland Department of the Environment, should be online this fall. We have urged and continue to urge a contingency language be in place in the uncodified effective date language of the bill that ensures that the database is publicly accessible at the time that these matters in fact become issues of fact. And then similarly, to the chairman's point, it gives perhaps the judiciary some extra time, because certainly the judiciary is going to have to comply with this bill in its own way. And then lastly, we have worked with the sponsor on ensuring that there's an ability to provide an electronic copy of a valid Form 330 lead inspection certificate, because for our members, it would be incredibly helpful so that that information could be on perhaps an iPad when they're processing these cases. And that's language I understand the sponsor and the advocates have agreed to, and would be happy to work with. I know we've worked on a draft with which we can get to council. And for those reasons, we would suggest a favorable report with those amendments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Greenfield? I don't see any, and no one has signed up in opposition. So, okay, that concludes the public hearing on House Bill 49. Let's proceed to House Bill 90. Delegate Learman.
Great. Hello, how are you today?
Just ducky.
Good. Hello, committee members. I'm excited to bring to you House Bill 90. House Bill 90 is a bill to bring to the state of Maryland the effort to affirmatively further fair housing. So as all of you, I hope know, the Federal Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968 and was intended to end housing discrimination and to promote diverse and inclusive communities. To do that, it utilized a variety of tools, one of which was the mandate for governments to affirmatively further fair housing. This mandate directed that HUD programs be used to remedy past segregation and discrimination and expand housing choices and make all neighborhoods places of opportunity. Probably needless to say, that hasn't happened. It's been more than 50 years since the Fair Housing Act was passed by Senator Ed Brooke, the man I was named after. And we still have incredibly segregated neighborhoods around the state and communities all over the state of Maryland. In order to further effectuate the Fair Housing Act, in 2015, the Obama administration created a regulation to help dictate the kind of reporting and data gathering that our local and state governments should be doing to make sure that we were tracking our progress or lack thereof. Because if you don't measure something, you don't know how you're doing. In any particular way to be able to improve better to be able to improve. And so that regulation went into effect. Unfortunately, when Trump became president, the regulation was put on hold almost immediately. And this past year, it was rescinded. And so this bill is an attempt to bring to the state level the recognition that even if the federal government's regulation isn't in effect anymore, we ourselves need to be doing the hard work of collecting data and understanding what our local governments and what our state government is doing to affirmatively further fair housing to create more integrated neighborhoods and communities around the state. There is currently no effective measurement or enforcement method at the federal level again, and so the states really have to take action. One thing I will say is that this bill, it is already a mandate, a federal mandate for all of our states and our local governments to affirmatively further fair housing. That is already in law. This does not change that. This simply says, okay, DHCD, we need you to do some additional reporting so that we understand the extent of the problem of segregation in the state of Maryland. And local governments, we need you to do some reporting too, to tell us what your plan is to integrate. It does not make any specific, you have to do this or you have to do that. It just says, tell us what you're doing and tell us how you plan to integrate further. So this legislation requires DHCD, local housing authorities, and political subdivisions to administer programs to affirmatively further fair housing, but also then to monitor actions, their actions to do that and to give assessments every 5 years. We're changing it from annually to every 5 years. We have a couple amendments to every 5 years submit a report to make sure that we are progressing, let us say, to a more integrated state and a more integrated neighborhoods throughout the state. So with that, I ask for a favorable report on HB 90. Thank you.
Any questions for the sponsor? I actually have a question, Brooke, since you've been doing a lot of research on this in preparation for this bill and prior years' bills. I mean, to what extent, what kind of reporting are we getting? I mean, can I find out, for example, the number of moderately priced rental units in a county and compare it to the number of people who might require that? I mean, is that even something that we can get a hold of, or is that the primary reason you're putting this in?
That's a great question. And the answer is that it depends on the county that you're looking in, the kind of data that you can access. So for the entitlement jurisdictions, or the larger, more populous jurisdictions that administer their own money through HUD. So HUD sends me through CDBG or some other grant program, and it goes through DHCD and straight to Montgomery County or Prince George's County or Howard County. In those entitlement jurisdictions, many of them have more robust reporting. And in fact, several years ago, 2 years ago, I think, or maybe just a year ago, all of Central Maryland, that's part of the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, they actually created, in response to the HUD legislation, an impediments to fair housing report. And so they have a lot of detailed reporting on the number of moderately priced units, how much there are, versus what the need is. The second thing is that several years ago, in budget language, I requested that DHCD complete an affordable housing needs assessment. And that affordable housing needs assessment was due quite a while ago, but it's going to be coming out any day. I'm smiling because I've had so many emails with Hunter at DHCD about this over the past 2 years. But that housing needs assessment will take stock of how many, it will focus on the actual affordability, it will be more about affordability and less about racial integration, right? It'll look at the economics, and it'll say, the goal is for it to say where we are versus where we need to be. So those are a couple of the different places. And then this would require additional reporting from DHCD and making sure that DHCD looks at the non-entitlement jurisdictions, but also keeps in mind the entitlement jurisdictions as well. So we can have a full and robust statewide look at where we really are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, got a couple of questions. First goes to Delegate Otto, then to Delegate Clark. Charles, you need to unmute yourself.
Hold on. Can you hear me now?
I can hear
you.
All right, thank you. My apologies for that mistake. I think you answered much of my question in the chairman's question, but how many authorities do we have in Maryland, and the size of them?
Unmute yourself.
And I just, is there additional burden that this reporting is going to put on the smaller ones, being representative of smaller districts? So I just asked the sponsor of that. So.
Yes, no, I think that's it's an important point, Delegate. So thank you for bringing that up. I think the smaller jurisdictions will have less. The reporting would be the same requirements, but of course they have less housing because they're less populated. And so while it's still imperative that all of those jurisdictions, they already have to follow the law, right? It is their federal obligation to affirmatively further fair housing. The assessment that this bill would ask them to do would be the same as the bigger ones, but bigger ones have more housing. And so it would be, I think, less burdensome than it would, we're not, because there would be basically less counting, but they would still need to come up with a plan. Looking at how segregated some of our rural jurisdictions are, there would still need to be a discussion of what those counties could do to more robustly, affirmatively further fair housing.
Well, I'll leave it at that at now, but we're challenged in the smaller jurisdictions with lesser numbers of being able to just do it digitally or with a computer program. We can't afford those programs that are going to shell out that those reports that you request and this, that, and the other, but somebody's got to make a determined effort to do it. So it does create a challenge. So
I understand. I think that's part of the reason that DHCD works so closely with the non-entitlement jurisdictions, with those jurisdictions, and could provide support and help. I will say all of those jurisdictions already will need to, through the housing, a bill that we passed several years ago, they already have to do a housing element of their comprehensive plans. And so this is sort of just an add-on to that housing element that they're already going to need to do. So just as an FYI.
Okay, next question goes to Delegate Clark. Delegate Clark, then Delegate Boyce, then Delegate Weigel in that order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Learman, quick question for you. I always start out with quick questions. Sometimes they get a little long, but in small counties such as Calvert County, where there's a few rentals, not a lot of rental space, but there's no ordinances on the books where there's any kind of a rental housing list or any restrictions or inspections of rentals and things like that. How hard will it be for counties like that to that do have a little bit of rental, but not a lot, to be able to do what you're asking here?
So this isn't necessarily about rental housing. This is about neighborhood development in general. I think some of the most egregious practices in our past on residential segregation were not about housing, right? They were about home buying, right? In the 1930s, when the Federal Housing Administration, incentivized developers to build in suburbs, they did it for whites only. And the Public Works Administration built completely separate and unequal housing projects. So this is not just about renting. This is about making sure that DHCD is spending our money, our taxpayer dollars, in a way that affirmatively furthers fair housing when it awards dollars for low-income housing tax credits and other programming, when it supports our public housing authorities and other funding as well, that we make sure in all of these jurisdictions that we are complying with federal law, which we already have an obligation to do, right? So this is not about creating a new obligation. It is already the obligation of every county and city in the state of Maryland to comply with the federal mandate to affirmatively further fair housing. And the definition of that is in this bill. It's not a new definition. It's already in federal law, but it's in this bill exactly the same. It doesn't create any new mandates. It simply says that we need to take better stock of what we are doing to comply with federal law.
So, excuse me, one second question. So if you have a subdivision you're going to build and you don't use any DHCD money or grants or anything to do that, how would the county, other than through zoning, affect the value of the houses in that subdivision to equate then to what you consider to be fair housing? Is fair housing based on the cost of housing, or you kind of got me a little mixed up here. when you have communities that have high property values and the property values are very high per lot, what's considered to be fair housing is the opportunity for anyone to be able to buy them. But if you just put a price on them, as it gets higher, it starts to eliminate people that can afford to buy them, no matter what race they are. So, I mean, how does that all fit into this? I mean, is this a way to ultimately get into local zoning and affect local zoning?
None of this, again, I'm going to say, this is all in the law already. And if you'd like to take a look at the bill, section 2401, you can read the definition of what it means, of what your county and my county and every county in the state has the obligation to be doing right now to affirmatively further fair housing. They have to take meaningful actions, in addition to actions aimed at combating discrimination, to overcome patterns of segregation and foster inclusive communities free from barriers that restrict access to housing and opportunity based on protected characteristics. That includes meaningful actions that, taken together, address significant disparities in housing needs and access to opportunity, replace segregated living patterns with truly integrated and balanced living patterns, transform racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity, and foster and maintain compliance with civil rights and fair housing laws. Meaningful action means a significant action that is designed and can be reasonably expected to achieve a material positive change, for instance, by increasing fair housing choice or decreasing disparities in access to opportunity. So that's federal law right now. In this bill, I'm not saying there is no mandate to change zoning laws. There's no mandate to build in a certain neighborhood or not. This bill says we have to do a better job at ensuring that we're complying with federal law, because there are too many segregated neighborhoods in Maryland. We are too segregated as a state, and we need to do a better job at understanding why. And when we are measuring what we're doing and taking a look and taking stock better, then we will do a better job at complying with federal law that already mandates us to affirmatively further fair housing.
So in other words, we're putting a law in effect for jurisdictions to show that they're living up to the federal law.
Yes, we're saying that they have to show what they're doing.
Okay, so in the past, so that means in the past, I don't know how many years you want to go back, is in your opinion that the jurisdictions haven't been living up to the federal law and no one has come in to enforce that?
Yes, I would say it's a fair statement that many jurisdictions have not met the goal of the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And that is why we live in such a segregated state. One of the reasons that we live in a very segregated state.
Okay, I understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next question goes to Delegate Boyce.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Delegate Clark answered my question, because I think when we talk about fair housing, it tends to be not so much sometimes the price, but it where it is, and then where we continue to essentially continue to create that segregation, but most importantly, concentrate poverty. So yep. I just want to be sure that what I'm hearing is also that this is going to really talk about where people are as it relates to quote unquote fair housing, not just, oh, we got, in this corner of the city or the state, there's a lot of opportunity for affordable housing here, but not really providing an opportunity for mixed income and mixed use areas.
Right. Yeah,
So,
you're right. Yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to agree with you. Yes. I mean, this is so much housing and about making sure that housing and economic opportunity are more equally distributed, right, among all the protected classes. So this is affirmatively furthering fair housing and, fair housing in general, and creating integrated neighborhoods is about ensuring access to opportunity, right, for all families. And, we see these huge racial wealth divides that exist, and the long commute times that people have to get to work. And so they, the lack of opportunity that exists, the placemaking is such an important part of that. So yes, absolutely. This is what you're saying is accurate. This is much about geography.
Sure, and I just wanted to come off Delegate Clark's point, though, that if this kind of researching this data ends up showing that we do have issues with zoning, then it would be, of course, the opportunity for jurisdictions to fix their zoning so that it would then fully comply with the 1968 Act. Isn't that so?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Delegate. I just had a couple questions. Hopefully you could clarify for me.
Sure.
And I won't say they're quick like Delegate Clark always does, because his aren't quick. So the fiscal note talks about potentially meaningful impacts on both small business and local government. And I generally don't like local government mandates if they're not funded. So can you clarify what exactly that impact is on both businesses and local governments? Is it simply the requirement to report, or is it something more than that?
I don't know what the small business effect is, other than if we have a more integrated and a more integrated state, then we will thrive. We will be a more thriving state. More people will have more dollars to spend at small businesses. I don't know what that is. It could be because in the bill we have private entities, but we take that out in an amendment that it's being drafted right now. So that might be that issue, but otherwise, besides that, I'm not sure. The bill imposes a mandate on a unit of local government. Yes, that is about the reporting. And again, it does not impose a new requirement to affirmatively further fair housing. That requirement already exists in federal law. It simply, it reiterates that, and it states that local governments must do an assessment and include that assessment of their efforts to affirmatively further fair housing within their comprehensive plan as part of the housing element of their comprehensive plan.
So the comprehensive plan requirement is still in there. You didn't address that in any amendment?
No, the comprehensive plan, I mean, every jurisdiction has to do a comprehensive plan. And we created several years ago a housing element in the comprehensive plan. And this adds to the housing element that local governments will include an assessment of their work to affirmatively further fair housing as part of that plan. I mean, they can include it in the plan, they can include it, a couple groups who are going to be testifying want it to be included by reference, which that would be acceptable to me. The idea is that the local governments are doing an assessment in concert with the HCD, who can support their efforts and help them of their progress on affirmatively furthering fair housing.
So would this law apply mainly to those folks that are receiving financial assistance, or is it going to apply to everyone? Because I'm thinking about, I know Delegate Clark asked about the rental properties, and it's not just rental properties, but I know there's a lot of potentially subsidized developments, rental properties, other folks that receive assistance from DHCD. So does this bill affect only those folks receiving assistance, or does it affect the entire jurisdiction?
It doesn't affect any folks. It doesn't affect people. It's about neighborhood and housing units and housing stock, and the effort to affirmatively further fair housing is about ensuring that there is, access to economic mobility and to housing in areas of opportunity around the state and in every community. So when you say folks, it sounds like you are talking about, will this be an analysis of actual renters? And it is not necessarily about that. It's about the housing that's available and ensuring that people with disabilities, that Black Marylanders, Latino Marylanders, that, that everybody who's in a protected class has the ability, that we are building integrated neighborhoods.
All right, and I don't follow your comment earlier. You said we live in a segregated state. What did you mean by that?
I mean that many areas of our state are just as segregated as they were, 50 years ago, unfortunately. We have, many areas in, multiple counties around the state where we have neighborhoods that are, as Delegate Boyce noted, let's build all the low-income housing here, or let's build properties that are, for wealthier people here. I don't think that we have fulfilled the promise of the Fair Housing Act. And I will say the recently released Central Maryland, BMC analysis on the impediments of fair housing backs that up. There is, that analysis of impediments to fair housing found numerous problems and challenges that need to be addressed.
All right, thank you.
Okay, that appears to be it for the sponsor. We have 5 people signed up in favor in this order: Matt Hill, Karen Wayback, Robin Dorsey, David Prater, and Tanika Richardson. So let's start with Matt Hill. Matt, welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Barve, members of the committee. Again, my name is Matt Hill. I'm an attorney with the Public Justice Center. And I will just start off where the last exchange was, which is that we do indeed have a significant, longstanding and deep problem around racial segregation and the lack of fair housing opportunity in the state. To kind of go off the discussion that we were just having, the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, their analysis of the Baltimore region found that there's a dissimilarity index, which is just a measure of how segregated a jurisdiction is, in the Baltimore region of 64.2. Anything over 55 is considered highly segregated. So the region's segregation rate has declined some since, like 1980, but in the past 10 years, it has plateaued. We've made virtually no progress in dismantling segregation and expanding housing opportunity in the past 10 years. That's one reason why HB 90 is so important. It is to provide that consistent framework for DHCD and local jurisdictions to analyze fair housing impediments and to articulate and implement data-driven concrete steps to address those impediments. I think too, it's important, and some of this discussion's already been had, but I'll just highlight a couple points, that this segregation has been caused by government action, the redlining, transportation actions, exclusionary zonings. And, our clients at the Public Justice Center really feel those effects. They're unable to find quality, affordable housing in neighborhoods where they want to raise their children. Now, the affirmatively furthering rule has been a political football in Washington for the past 40 years. HB 90 just provides some consistency and stability as to how these analyses take place and how to articulate those steps. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, next, Karen, you're up next.
Thank
And
you.
if you're not speaking, please mute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Karen Wabeck. I'm an attorney with the Homeless Persons Representation Project. HPRP strongly supports House Bill 90. Affirmatively furthering fair housing is a critically important tool to combat segregated housing patterns that persist across Maryland, and particularly in the Baltimore metropolitan region. The 2020 analysis of impediments to fair housing choice in the Baltimore region, which Delegate Learman referenced and Mr. Hill referenced, found that the region remains segregated racially and economically, again, due to past actions that caused and have perpetuated inequities. Indeed, African-American residents in the Baltimore region remain the most segregated of any racial group and are still by far the most likely to live in neighborhoods with concentrated poverty and face the largest disparities in educational and health outcomes. House Bill 90 would reinforce Maryland's commitment to fair and equal housing by requiring DHCD, political subdivisions, and housing authorities to report on their efforts to affirmatively further fair housing. Protecting and strengthening the work of fair housing has perhaps never been more important than it is right now. 2020 saw the start of a long overdue reckoning with racial inequality in Maryland and across the country. Meanwhile, a global pandemic rages, further exacerbating housing instability for low-income renters, a disproportionate number of whom are people of color. House Bill 90 is an essential part of Maryland's response in this unprecedented moment to foster diverse and inclusive communities that truly reflect our Maryland. HPRP urges a favorable report on HB 90. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Robin Dorsey. Robin? Is Robin Dorsey there?
Yes. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Robin Dorsey. I am the Fair Housing Director for the Fair Housing Action Center of Maryland. We work to ensure that every Marylander has access to safe, affordable housing, free from discrimination, harassment, and code violations. And we are a program of the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition, which advances economic justice and financial inclusion. I am very grateful to Delegate Learman, who is my own delegate, for introducing this important legislation. And I'd like to start with a quote. In 1909, Booker T. Washington observed, quote, "So far as I know, there is no city in the United States where the colored population owns so many comfortable and attractive homes in proportion to the population as in the city of Baltimore." That shocked me the first time I heard it, to imagine a place where there was something like equity. But that brief glimpse of equity was short-lived. The very next year, Baltimore passed the first piece of legislation in the country that systematically separated housing by race. That law was followed by restrictive zoning, blockbusting. In the 1930s, the federal government institutionalized redlining, cutting Black neighborhoods off from mortgages and opening those same communities up to predatory lenders. By the time the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, the Baltimore region was hyper-segregated. And it is just as hyper-segregated today, more than 50 years later. Recent research found that Baltimore is one of the top 20 most segregated places in the country. This hyper-segregation, this racial segregation, was intentionally created, and it must be intentionally dismantled. This bill copies the federal statute and charges local governments with proactively pursuing fair and free housing choice, and then holds them accountable to that by requiring regular data, plans, and goals about what is happening in their community, what strategies that they are going to pursue to achieve free and fair housing. The bill doesn't mandate specific strategies. It recognizes that local solutions that are community driven are going to be more effective. And so, Chair, members of the committee, the intentional work to dismantle this housing—
If you could begin to wrap up, that would be true.
—is long overdue, and I urge you to give this bill a favorable report.
Thank you very much. Next, David Prater.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on HB 90. My name is David Prater. I am a managing attorney at Disability Rights Maryland. We are a non-for-profit law firm mandated by the United States to advance the civil rights of people with disabilities. Our housing work in particular focuses on ensuring community integration of people with disabilities by expanding safe, affordable, decent, and accessible housing. I think it's always important to start a conversation about fair housing for people with disabilities by discussing why we have fair housing for people with disabilities, why they are a protected class. We've talked a lot about history of racial discrimination in Maryland, but it's also important to recognize the history of institutionalization and segregation of people with disabilities. That is a history of locking people with disabilities away into institutional settings. And that is a consequence of public policies that incentivize that model. Housing remains the #1 barrier to moving folks from those institutional settings into the community. I think COVID-19 has certainly brought into stark relief some of the consequences of those public policy decisions, where those institutional and congregate settings have been decimated by the lack of affordable and fair housing for people in the community. But even in the community, our clients continue to face discrimination. Disability remains the #1 basis for fair housing complaints to federal, state, and local fair housing enforcement agencies. So there is a dearth of opportunity and choice for people with disabilities for housing in Maryland, and HB 90 would seek to cure that by providing robust data, giving jurisdictions the tools to address that need. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Tanika Richardson. Tanika, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Okay. You've got, welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. So my name is Tanika Richardson. I am currently a state policy fellow with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. One of our founding principles is that every Marylander should be able to achieve their full potential in a healthy economy that offers a widely shared rising standard of living. I was going to write something and prepare something, but I realized we only have a few minutes. So I just wanted to just come in front of the committee, just as a professional in this line of work, doing housing work, and also as a recipient of some of the fair housing laws that we do have on the books. I just wanted to come and just speak to the committee and just kind of share kind of my personal story. I have personally benefited from some fair housing laws, essentially the Thompson versus HUD case as a Baltimore Mobility Regional Voucher recipient, to which where I located to Howard County, Maryland, and I still reside today. Just through my experience, I can definitely attest to just agreeing with what the other panel has shared about the how things are just really segregated and how housing is really hard to find. And I appreciate someone mentioning that this is just not about rental housing, but it's also about home ownership as well. Because being a voucher recipient, I've given up my voucher. I'm on the path to home ownership, and here in Howard County, I'm still looking and still struggling to be able to find a home that's affordable. However, I do understand a lot of that is zoning laws and things that needs to be handled on a local level. However, I do believe that, to the delegate's point, that there are laws that are currently on the books, and I definitely feel like holding districts accountable to those laws on the book and having them kind of show us what they are doing to further fair housing is very important. And that's pretty much all I wanted to say.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Those were all the witnesses who signed up only just in favor of the bill. Any questions for them? Okay. Thank you very much. There are no questions. I don't think. Yeah, no, there aren't. Okay, we'll go to 3 people are signed up favorable with amendments. Aaron Karpowitz, Alex Butler, and Justin Fiore. So let's start with Karpowitz. Aaron, you there? There you are.
Yes, hi. Good afternoon, Chairman Barve, members of the committee. Thanks for having me.
Is that noise coming from you or from somebody else?
Oh, no. Shoot. Is it a bad noise? Is it coming now?
It's not like a symphony.
Okay. I'm sorry. I can mute myself and maybe try to come back in if you can take me out of order.
Okay, sure. I'll do that. Alex Butler, you there?
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Alex Butler with the Maryland Association of Counties, here supporting House Bill 90 with amendments. The bill requires a few things. Number 1, an annual reporting requirement, which I believe will be changed to every 5 years. 2, an additional detailed assessment to be completed before further funding will be provided by DHCD or during the next comprehensive plan cycle in 2022, whichever comes first. A comprehensive plan can take significant time to draft and update. This includes community involvement, planning staff, and in some cases outside consultants. These are more visionary documents and they set long-term ideals, primarily based on a 10-year cycle. We have a feeling that many of the reporting requirements would be left to local jurisdictions and a combined report would be filed by the Department of Housing and Community Development. these types of reports and assessments could be burdensome for some of the smaller jurisdictions. I'm sure you'll hear more from a municipal perspective. This may take significant time for jurisdictions, especially if they don't have a full, robust program in place already. By not providing funding until such an assessment is fully complete, it penalizes those communities that need that DHCD funding the most. So we'd like to work with the sponsor and the committee to address that sort of penalty provision and limit the burden on local government. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will end my testimony. Thank you very much.
Okay, why don't we go to Justin Fiore with the MML. Justin, you out there?
Sure. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, committee members. For the record, my name is Justin Fiore. I'm a government relations manager with the Maryland Municipal League. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify here today in support of House Bill 90 with amendments. Our members are interested in helping move the ball forward here, but MML is concerned that in some jurisdictions, market forces and consumer behavior simply overshadow the impact that local government can have. And that this bill could essentially bar local governments who can't overcome these obstacles quickly from receiving DHCD funding. And we also think it'll have additional barriers for smaller, less well-funded jurisdictions. Given the scope of the work included in reports and planning, the cost to develop these might outweigh the risks for applying and possibly not being awarded funds from initiatives such as the Community Legacy Program, which can be for as little as $20,000. I say this while acknowledging that there's more we can do in terms of education and planning. As the sponsor mentioned, this body required local governments to adopt a housing element to their comprehensive plans a couple of years ago, and we supported that legislation. In the years since, we've sat with MDP and other stakeholders to develop guidance for local jurisdictions to address the need for affordable housing and workforce housing. There's an opportunity to build on that here, but we should let this plan run its course. A couple of reasons why addressing this in the comprehensive plan has an advantage over the DHC reporting model is one, it's just not the reporting costs of the bill, but consultants are also really expensive as well. And then two, we shouldn't be rushing this plan out to meet a DHCD deadline, but instead take into consideration when planners are already contemplating the bigger picture as they do every 5 to 10 years in their comprehensive plan. One last note with my 5 seconds here is that these are public documents that are updated every 5 to 10 years and can be shared with DHCD as they look to do other reporting.
Okay, Aaron, can you come back to us?
Yes, sorry, can you hear me okay now?
Yes,
I
sounds
just got
great.
in just in time. Okay, great. Thank you for having me. I'm Erin Karpowitz, and I'm the Policy and Development Director with Anne Arundel County's Housing and Community Development Agency, and I'm also the immediate past chair of the Baltimore Metropolitan's Fair Housing Group. And we're responsible for ensuring that fair housing plans are completed for the county, and those are all required as being an entitlement jurisdiction. I want to start off by saying we are supportive of House Bill 90. In fact, together with the Baltimore Metropolitan Council and our other partners in the Baltimore area, we recently led and developed. Can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you. Somebody else needs to mute themselves.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So we actually, in fact, completed just such an assessment this past summer. And as a result, we have been able to incorporate local strategies identified in the assessment into our 5-year housing plan, as well as our county's local land use housing element. Much of the data is readily available census data that jurisdictions have to report on anyway in their 5-year housing plans. And much of the data also should be reported by DHCD regarding assisted units. We do, however, support a minor amendment, which the sponsor has mentioned she would support, and that would allow for the assessment to be incorporated by reference into our local land use plan. The bill would also require the state and local jurisdictions to submit an annual report to the governor, touching upon the number of data points. And we think that this will help state and local jurisdictions conduct more reliable fair housing assessments and better be able to plan for the expenditure of federal funds in an equitable manner. In fact, we actually included having DHCD report on assisted housing units and some of the demographic and race information that is included in this bill. That was one of the recommendations of our fair housing assessment that we just completed.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for any of these three witnesses? Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 90. Let's now turn to House Bill 105. Delegate Henson, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, distinguished members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. Chairman Barve, Vice Chairman Stein, thank you for this opportunity to present House Bill 105, Compliance Monitor Reporting, with the intent of securing the committee's favorable vote. This bill has a one-time fiscal note of $75,000 for fiscal year 2020 and can be carried out using the department's existing resources thereafter. This bill does three things. First, it requires the Department of Housing and Community Development to publish annual reports on properties under contract for compliance monitoring. Second, it requires them to maintain those reports on their website. And third, it requires them to provide a method for residents to provide feedback for those reports. If you're wondering what's a property under compliance monitoring, then you're in good company. Please allow me to shed some light on that process. DHCD is Maryland's designated housing credit agency to administer low-income housing tax credits. Low-income housing tax credits, called LIHTC credits, are the primary financing vehicle for developing affordable housing. There are LIHTC properties under contract in DHCD in all 23 Maryland counties and Baltimore City for compliance monitoring. DHCD conducts annual reviews and site visits for each of the 381 properties and growing in their portfolio. These annual visits consist of reviewing resident files for compliance and inspecting units to root out physical deficiencies. By reviewing resident files, compliance monitors play an important role in consumer protection. Their unit inspections maintain the health and safety of affordable housing for more than 13,000 Maryland families. As critical as their role is, their findings are not shared with the persons most affected, and that's the renters. HB 105 provides transparency for low-income housing renters and a voice in the quality control of their housing. Thank you.
Thank you. For the sponsor of the bill. All right, seeing none, we'll proceed to the witnesses in favor, and they are Tisha Guthrie, Tony Pratt, Reverend Samuel Colbert, Tiffany Ralph, and Dominique Scurry. So we'll start with Tisha Guthrie. Tisha, welcome to the committee. You've got 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm just going to start with a couple of words. Dignity, engagement, equity, inclusion, investment, tenant participation, and sustainability. As the delegate introduced to you the idea that there needs to be oversight and there needs to be transparency. As it stands, tenants have no mechanism, whether we have the right or not, we have no mechanism to find if the findings of these audits and the audits are actually indicative of the current living standards that tenants such as myself are living within. I can tell you right at this very point, I'm living in an apartment complex where there is a COVID outbreak, and we can hardly even get that information from our management company. Those details need to be reported, and they need to be posted in a public manner so that there is accountability, and that those management companies and those people who benefit from federal funding are actually held to a standard and are able to be seen by the public and to be determined whether or not they are even reliable and worthy of the funding. It's unusual and quite indicative of how we prioritize the housing of people who are deemed low income. The very fact that we don't have this mechanism and this standard in place. Housing is the first step to health. The commissioner in Baltimore County, Mr. Branch, indicates that housing is a vital sign. And we need to hold these entities accountable. And I ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tony Pratt. Tony, with us?
Yes, sir.
Okay, welcome.
Good evening. So good evening, Chairman. Good evening, Delegate Henson. I thank you for championing Bill HB 105 that I'm completely in favor of. It is high time that we treat this as important as we treat other laws. This is definitely an equity issue. Get it not confused. We are dealing with most of our vulnerable residents that are having to not have checks and balances as it pertains to mold issues, as it pertains to plumbing issues, as it pertains to reporting issues of their redetermination. I'm an advocate and I'm also an organizer that organizes housing, and to go into meetings with residents that have their paperwork and to hear the landlord say, well, I've lost the paperwork, can you give it to us again? And bullying these residents that if they don't produce this, that they can lose their housing. There needs to be this check and balance mechanism put in place that this bill would offer, where we have reporting, where we can go to a centralized location and get the information, where the federal government cannot keep giving these different landlords and housing complexes tax credits when they aren't even in compliance. We are licensing houses that have mold in them. We are licensing houses that have plumbing issues. The people that we are not protecting are our most vulnerable citizens. And really, we should not be here having to enforce a law like this. It should already be in place. To vote no on this law means that you don't care about the most vulnerable, means that we don't care where our tax dollars are going to, means that we don't care that people are living in mold issues that are having health concerns. It means that we don't care about holding these housing complex and landlords with checks and balances. So thank you, and I pray that you will support this bill.
Thank you very much. Next up, Reverend Samuel Colbert. Reverend?
No sign of Reverend in the waiting room.
Okay, maybe he'll turn up in a few minutes. How about Tiffany Ralph? Ah, there you are, Tiffany.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Thank you very much, Delegate Henson, for heading this bill. I am very much in favor of this bill. My son and I live in an apartment complex here in Baltimore, Maryland, where we have lived for almost 7 years, and we are unfortunately living in a situation that was talked about by Ms. Pratt and also Ms. Guthrie. We have mold in our building, a severe mold issue. We have plumbing issues, which are causing the mold issues. We have a COVID outbreak in our building, and the management does not seem to take notice, or if they do take notice, they push it to the side. They do not make the residents the first priority. It has become an issue where so many tenants, including myself, have and are developing health issues, severe health issues that are impacting our day-to-day lives. And this bill is needed to enforce and assure that tenants like myself and my son, who are a part of the community and we're just as viable and as important as any other community member, that we will have a good, healthy future. And the way that things are, the way that the laws are right now, without having this enforcement, that future cannot be promised. I don't know what my health is going to be in the next year or two because of the environment that I've been in. So I thank you for taking my support in favor of passing this bill.
Thank you very much. Is Dominique Scurry there? Dominique? Ah, there we go. Welcome. could you please unmute yourself? There you go.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Dominique. I'm a resident. I was the co-chair of Safe and Affordable Housing with ACT, and I'm also a member of First Christian. This bill will be beneficial to low-income housing. It will help monitor the low-income communities that have or had issues in their house or apartments. The property owners will be held accountable for the non-compliance with the guideline, me being injured and me getting help through ACT. I also had meetings with the mayor, the city council, the governor, in order to get the property manager's attention to get the apartment where it's supposed to be. I had some of you come out to Woodside Gardens apartments to see for yourself. The look showed me that I wasn't supposed to be living like this in these conditions. Then we organized other residents in their community to see what other issues we're having in our apartments, from rental issues to mold, air ducts not clean, filters not being changed every 3 months, basketball courts taken down, to name a few. If it wasn't for ACT and the community coming together, our apartments wouldn't be up to par as today. The city will only find out about it when they do inspections. However, when they do inspections, the property manager take them to the apartment that will pass inspections and that will be in good condition. They will receive their grant money, but haven't straightened up their property as they should. This bill will help you monitor the property owners, hold them accountable, and get feedback from the residents that's actually living in the property. I appreciate you guys. Thank you. I hope this bill be approved.
Thank you. Well, so far, nobody's opposed. So is Reverend Samuel Colbert there? Okay, in that case. Okay, in that case, we will proceed to questions. I see that Delegate Wyville has a question, so you've got the floor, Delegate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have a question for the bill sponsor. So I can totally agree with you that if someone's accepting tax credits, they should be in compliance. But what are the ramifications if they're not? Because your bill only requires them to report that on a website and allow feedback. But does some other provision of the law have more teeth to it that could rescind the tax credits or make the project ineligible or something like that?
Thank you for the question, Delegate. In last year's budget language, we asked for a report from the Department of Housing and Community Development that would be similar to the report that's called for annually in HB 105. In the report, it details a little bit of the process of what happens when a property is not in compliance. And it starts with a series of notices and giving them the opportunity to cure the defects. They get a 90-day period where they can cure the resident files or any physical defects, and then they'll come out for a re-inspection. If a property ultimately doesn't bring themselves into compliance, then just as you stated, they could petition to HUD to have any rent subsidies abated for the property temporarily, and ultimately it could result in the tax credits being revoked.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Well, no one has signed up in opposition to the bill, so very much, Delegate Henson. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 105. We will proceed to House Bill 109, the Vice Chair's bill. So, Dana, you got 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. In our committee over the years, we've adopted a number of building standards. We've approved the International Energy Conservation Code, authorized adoption of the International Green Construction Code, and have made changes to the International Residential Code. These codes are all developed and updated by the International Code Council, which is the recognized source for building codes and standards. So the Code Council, in collaboration with the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance, has also developed the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, which this bill would adopt for the state. The bill establishes minimum regulations for newly constructed public and residential pools, spas, and hot tubs. The bill is not retroactive, so that pool owners of existing pools would not have to bring those pools up to code. But if they were to rehab an existing pool, the guidelines would apply. Now, the code is needed because while most jurisdictions have some form of existing pool and spa regulations, the state lacks a comprehensive code that addresses design, construction, and safety of pools and spas. This bill is fundamentally a bill about safety, especially the safety of children. According to a Department of Health report from 2015, drowning was the second leading cause of death for children ages 0 to 4, and the third leading cause of death for children ages 5 to 14. So this code would enhance pool safety in many ways, requiring best practices that are proven to reduce drowning fatalities. It would also ensure that pools and spas are governed by a consistent code. Counties would be able to amend the code to fit their needs, but the critical point is that everyone will work from the same code. 7 jurisdictions in Maryland have already adopted the code, such as Anne Arundel County, Montgomery County, and Baltimore City. And 14 other states have taken steps to mandate adoption of the code, including most of our adjoining states. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to take questions, and I know there are several witnesses who'll be testifying.
Any questions for the Vice Chair of the committee? Seeing none, I have a number of witnesses that you, oh, wait a minute, hold on. Brooke, do you have a question?
Yes, I'm sorry. I just have a quick question, and that's about pads.
About what?
I'm sorry?
Splash pads. I have not taken a detailed look at your bill, but I would just ask, maybe we can have an offline conversation about this, but splash pads are very different than pools. And a couple years ago, we passed a bill to make sure that splash pads were treated differently than pools and spas. And so I just wondered if your bill covered splash pads or kept them hopefully separate.
Okay, unfortunately, I don't know, but hopefully the witnesses coming up would be able to answer that. So
no problem. We can
maybe it's because I don't have kids, but what is a splash pad?
You know,
is
it's
that
like
a slip and slide.
Yeah, it's like almost like a little playground, but but they spit out water, right? Like it's like a feature playground. And you know, often in jurisdictions, it's much more affordable to build something like a splash pad than it is to build a pool, and it still gives outdoor recreation space.
Okay.
So I love them. So
okay.
As a mom.
All righty. Thanks for clarifying. Okay, so we have a number of people signed up, and I understand this is the order the sponsor would like. Justin Wiley, then Sean Strasbaugh, then Jason Davidson, then Bill Bryant, followed by Alan Korn, Adam Kaczmarchi, and Alan Walker in that order, I think. So why don't we start with Justin Wiley. Justin, you out there? Well, your system is breaking down already, Dana. How about Sean Strasbaugh?
Yes, good afternoon, Chair and committee members. First of all, can you hear me loudly and clear?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And again, my name is Sean Strasbaugh. I'm the Senior Director of Plumbing, Mechanical, and Fuel Gas and Swimming Pool Programs at the International Code Council and serve as a subject matter expert for the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code. I'm here to answer questions the committee might have on this code or its application, and I will get to the one question that was already raised in regards to splash pads here shortly. In short, adopting the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code for public and private pool design and construction updates the out-of-date construction standards referenced by the State Department of Health, such as the ANSI NSF Standard 50, which involves circulation systems and the related materials for pools and spas, which is from the 1992 standard realm, again is adopted under the State Department of Health. Also, there are several other referenced National Spa and Pool Institute standards from the 1990s within that same State Department of Health regulation, as well as there's numerous other patchworks of private pool requirements throughout the state of Maryland. I will note, as was elaborated earlier by Delegate Stein, that Anne Arundel County, Cecil County, Frederick County, Montgomery County, and Wicomico counties, along with Baltimore and Gaithersburg cities, currently adopt and use the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code for design and construction requirements for both residential and commercial swimming pools and spas. Additionally, as pointed out, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C. also adopt the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code for design construction requirements for public and residential swimming pools. Again, if I can answer that question under this testimony in regards to splash pads, I will go forth, noting my time is of wrapping up here shortly.
Okay, well, we'll probably get it at the end with question and answer. I see Justin Wiley has shown up. So Justin, you get the next bite at the apple.
Thank you very much, Chair and committee members. I'm Justin Wiley, Vice President of Government Relations for the International Code Council. The Code Council is a not-for-profit association with over 64,000 members, 1,200 of whom reside in Maryland. Our members develop model building codes used in the design, build, compliance process to construct safe, energy efficient, and affordable and resilient structures. Maryland adopts and implements 9 I-codes, including the International Building Code, the International Residential Code, and the Energy Conservation Code. I come before you in support of HB 109, and I'm thrilled to be joined by a diverse group of supporters, including the Maryland Building Officials Association, the Maryland Building Industry Association, the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance, State Farm, the Metro Fire Chiefs Fire Marshal Committee, and National Drowning Prevention Alliance. Not often do associations representing the regulated join hands with associations representing regulators. I think that demonstrates good government through the adoption of safe, reasonable, and energy efficient provisions that are contained within the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, or ISPSC. The ISPSC covers the design and construction of pools and spas. It is unique in its coordination with the Building Code, the Residential Code, the International Plumbing Code, and the other I-codes that are adopted in Maryland. HB 109 adopts the ISPSC by mirroring the statutory language used to create the Maryland Building Performance Standards and follows the same adoption cycle as the IBC, the IRC, and the IECC. This ensures that pool and spa design and construction keeps up with Maryland's other building regulatory provisions and furthers safe, energy efficient, and updated construction practices. This legislation is timely as the Department of Labor is beginning their review of the 2021 codes for statewide adoption and implementation. HB 109 does not require counties or cities to alter permitting requirements used for swimming pools and spas. Rather, HB 109 simply seeks to harmonize swimming pool and spa provisions across the state, providing contractors a foundation on which to build that is coordinated with Maryland's building codes.
Okay.
Thank you, and I appreciate a favorable report for HB 109.
Thank you very much. Next, we will go to Jason Davidson. Jason. Okay, we'll proceed to Bill Bryant.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair Brockie and members of the committee. My name is William R. Bryant. I am the former Assistant Director of Inspections and Permits for Anne Arundel County. I've served as the President of the Maryland Building Officials Association and served as the President of the International Code Council. I'm currently serving as the past President of the ICC, and I've completed 32 years of service in the code profession with Anne Arundel County and 6 years in the private sector. I served on the original committee to develop the Maryland Building Performance Standards and served on the Maryland Rehabilitation Code Council. As a former building official, I'm happy to provide testimony in favor of HB 109, adopting the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code for design and construction of public, semi-public, and private pools and spas. At the local level in Anne Arundel County, I began studying the option of adopting ISPSC during our 2015 code adoption. Doing a deep dive in this code in 2014, I postponed the adoption in the 2015 cycle based on some administrative issues we had at the county level. During my 2018 local code adoption process, I included the International Pool Spa Code in our construction codes that were adopted in Anne Arundel County. The code adoption of the ISPSC was part of the package that Anne Arundel County approved. There were no public comments presented during the code adoption process of the 2018. Adding the ISPSC to the Maryland Building Performance Standards provides a safe and comprehensive code designed for the construction of swimming pools and spas that correlates with other building safety. By adopting this code as a code enforcement document, it gives the local code official the design criteria to aid the design and the performance of standards concerning swimming pools to be constructed. The code now provides for designs.
If you could begin to wrap up, the community would, a committee would appreciate it.
Okay, this updates the last time we had codes, our pool standards in the code, which was in 1996. I'm willing for any questions. I'll be more than happy to comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, let's hear from Alan Korn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, right here. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Alan Korn. I'm the General Counsel for the National Drowning Prevention Alliance. I also represent many families and family foundations who have had children who have died from water-related injuries, drownings, entrapments. I'm not a plaintiff's attorney. I represent them in their foundation efforts and doing good in their communities. And given who I represent and speak on behalf, there's no surprise that I support the adoption of this code. The code, which I have right here, sits on my desk and read it regularly, addresses lots of different safety features as it relates to pools: barriers, sanitation, electrical safety or electrocution prevention, lighting, even signage for public pools. But I instead am going to just focus on one of them, and that's the entrapment prevention provisions of the code. And first, a little bit of history. About 10 years ago, 12 years ago, Congress passed a piece of legislation called the Virginia Graham-Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act that requires anti-entrapment devices on public pools, not residential pools. And there's not been a death since the effective date of that act in public pools. This piece of this code helps close that gap by requiring entrapment devices on residential pools, or at least, as the Vice Chairman mentioned, new residential pools or pools that are substantially renovated. So that helps it, I guess, in a sense, it does for residential pools what the Virginia Graham-Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act did for public pools around the country. Happy to entertain questions from the committee, but we give it an unqualified thumbs up.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, let's go to Adam Kachamarchi. Did I get your last name correctly, Adam?
Yeah, close, Kachamarchi. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, and other committee members. My name is Adam Kachamarchi, and I am the Executive Director of the National Drowning Prevention Alliance. I, along with my dear friend, Mr. Korn, also keep a copy of the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code handy. The Pool and Spa Code is a model code that regulates the minimum requirements for design, construction, alteration, repair, and maintenance of new or substantially remodeled swimming pools, hot tubs, and/or aquatic facilities. The National Drowning Prevention Alliance strongly supports the adoption of the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code in states and local jurisdictions around the country. Many states and local jurisdictions have already done just that, and we hope that more will follow suit. We strongly encourage your adoption in the great state of Maryland to save lives and make water safer for all. The adoption of the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code provides many benefits supporting the safety and health of those around water. If adopted, the code requires pools and other water facilities to, number one, meet the requirements, as Mr. Korn mentioned, of the Virginia Graham-Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act. Two, meet the ANSI 7 standards for suction entrapment. Require layers of protection around pools and spas that help prevent the unfettered access by children, including fencing, covers, door, and window alarms. And as the Vice Chair mentioned, the drowning statistics, we strongly feel that those measures do reduce the risk of drowning. And finally, ensure that water quality is healthy and safe, among many other safety and health provisions included in the code. In all, the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code makes significant strides in increasing water safety and reducing the risk of tragic preventable accidents around water. We hope that you will strongly consider adoption and weigh heavily the potential of this code to increase safety of your citizens around water. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I understand that Jason Davidson is now with us, so why don't you go right ahead, Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Jason Davidson, Director of Government Relations for the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance, known as PHTA, which represents more than 3,500 business entities within the industry. You probably might recall my time working with this body on ground rent legislation a year ago with SDAT, and I'm happy to be back before this committee. On behalf of PHTA, we thank the Vice Chair for sponsoring this very important bill. House Bill 109 will bring uniformity statewide through the ISPSC, which is the code that will be adopted through this legislation. It addresses all aspects of public and residential pool and spa design and construction, including energy conservation, quality, and safety. Just to be clear, this bill will only apply to new construction, new design, and certain renovations for existing pools. Operation and maintenance will remain with the Department of Health. And I just would like to address a fiscal note real quick. If you look at the maps submitted as part of our testimony, the code has been adopted in all states that border Maryland with exception to Delaware. And I also want to note Baltimore City and Montgomery County have adopted this, as well as Wacomico County. We have not heard of any rising costs as a result of adoption of this code. And also I'd like to point out the expenditures noted by the Department of Labor. Just to hold a visual, this is the ISPSC code. It's only about this thick, about 50 pages. I don't believe that this will be a heavy lift for the Department of Labor. I believe they can handle this with existing resources. It shouldn't be that heavy to comb through. And finally, I just would like to mention, for the good of the order, the Department of Health has asked Delegate Stein, the Vice Chair, to offer some technical amendments that will just simply clarify what I mentioned earlier, that the Department of Labor will handle new construction and new design, and the Department of Health will handle the existing operations maintenance. So with that, I ask for support and happy to take any questions.
Okay, and the last witness in favor would be Alan Walker. Mr. Walker, you there?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon. Thank you for the time. My name is Alan Walker, and I'm the Vice President of Operations of Anthony and Sylvan Pools. We design and build residential pools in the state of Maryland, along with active operations in 13 other states. I currently hold the Maryland Home Improvement Commission contractor's license for Anthony and Sylvan Pools. We support the statewide adoption of the ISPSC in the state of Maryland. This will help bring all the counties to a uniform level of code adoption, providing for a higher quality and safer product to the consumers of Maryland. A statewide adoption will benefit business by allowing pool builders to adhere to a uniform code, as opposed to different codes currently adopted at the county level. This will also ensure Maryland consumers will be getting the benefit of the most current safety developments and codes in a more timely manner. We strongly endorse the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brooke, do you want to ask your question about splash pads?
I'd be delighted to, Mr. Chair. So I was wondering if this bill, and I'm sorry I haven't read it thoroughly, covers or would change how splash pads are regulated. A few years ago, we passed legislation to keep them a little bit separate in some respects because they are so different. To lower the barrier to building splash pads in all of our jurisdictions. Thank you.
Through the chair, Sean Strasball here with ICC, if I may speak.
Oh, sure.
Thank you, sir. And to answer the question that was given, the term splash pads under the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, we deem a defined term as interactive water play features. And if a setting is provided, I'm going to read the definition of any indoor or outdoor structure designed to allow for public recreation activities with recirculated, filtered, and treated water that includes sprayed, jetted, or other water sources containing bathers and not incorporating standing or captured water as part of the bather activity. So that's the definition. So if those interactive water features are going to have recirculated or filtered water, there is a section under section 612 that covers those play features. The main driving point for that is when the recirculating or filtering the water, that they maintain a water quality, that those bathers using those facilities do not have any prone sicknesses from that water quality. If the water that is being used is from a potable source and is not recirculated or filtered, they would then not fall under this provision. So I hope that clears that up.
So the answer is no.
It does.
Right.
I think that we might need to go back and look at what we passed a few years ago because there was some concern, I think, among jurisdictions. It used to be the state required sort of every splash pad, even if it was a tiny little corner one in an urban area, to have a bathroom, and that basically makes it impossible for urban jurisdictions that are geographically challenged because they don't have much space to build new splash pads. So I think we'll just have to go back and make sure that it doesn't sort of override any of the work that we did to hold them out a little bit. Thanks.
Oh, okay. I see no further questions, so let's proceed to the only person who is testifying against the bill, Kenneth Welsh with the Maryland Conference of Local Environmental Health Directors.
Thank you and good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Kenny Welch. I'm the current president with the Maryland Conference of Environmental Health Directors. Our conference represents the local environmental health programs who regulate public use pools. Maryland Department of Health worked with industry since 2014 to amend COMAR 1017-01. They use a variety of different codes, including the Model Aquatic Health Code, which is recognized by the CDC and U.S. Public Health Services. Industry refused and pushed back on this as we were working through it once it got to the point for submittal for changes to COMAR. While the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code is for construction purposes, a private backyard pool is much different than a public use pool. Public use pool involves operational standards as well, which is also part of the Model Aquatic Health Code. We're concerned House Bill 109 is taking authority away from the Maryland Department of Health, who are the experts for health and safety and understand construction design decisions based off of operations for end users of the public use pools. Without the Maryland Department of Health authority for new and remodeled pools, for continued review of pool construction and capabilities to amend those construction health regulations for public use pools, we respectfully request the committee to give House Bill 109 an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Any questions? Well, yes, the vice chair has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is more of a isn't that so question. Thank you for your testimony. I just wanted to ask if you're aware that that we have negotiated with MDH amendments that satisfy any concerns they had. Make clear it does not alter the authority of the Department of Health to regulate the operation and maintenance of pools, and also it requires the department in adopting the code to consult with the Department of Health and the effect of proposed changes on health and safety. So just wanted to say I'd be happy to, if you're not aware of those amendments, be happy to forward them to you.
Yes, we were not aware of those amendments, so we'd be happy if you could forward it to the conference.
Will do.
Brooke, you still have your hand up. Do you have a question or did you forget to put it down? Okay.
Sorry, I just forgot to put it down. Thanks.
Okay, so any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. That ends the public hearing on House Bill 109. We'll proceed to House Bill 110. Delegate Corman.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I come before you today once again for the Electric Vehicle Recharging Equipment for Multifamily Units Act. If this sounds familiar, it's the third year in a row that it's been before your committee. The first year I worked with you, Mr. Chairman, and Chair Holmes and the advocates on a compromise piece of legislation that then passed your committee unanimously and the full House on a bipartisan basis. We passed it again through your committee unanimously last year and on a bipartisan basis through the House. And we're just waiting for our friends in the Senate to catch up with the great work of your committee and the full chamber. Just as a reminder, this is a compromise piece of legislation that essentially sets rules for the road on how homeowners associations and condo boards have to deal with those who are seeking to install charging equipment for electric vehicles on site. It just follows legislation in Florida, New York, Virginia, a few other states that sets rules for the road, if you'll forgive the expression. That again, those in the industry as well as EV advocates have found acceptable. The legislation as introduced has an MEA grant clarification. We're willing to strike that out of the bill after working with MEA to ensure that the type of funding we're trying to provide there is already eligible under existing MEA programs. So we've sent that amendment over to you all. But I would, again, for the third year in a row, ask for a favorable vote from the committee and on to the Senate, Mr. Chair.
Okay, it looks like Delegate Healy has a question for the sponsors. So go ahead, Ann.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask, is this in exactly the same posture as the bill as it passed the House last year?
Yeah, the only thing that's a little different, which again, I'd recommend striking out, is the provision on the MEA grant, but the substantive provisions most people care about, which are the rules of the road for HOAs and condo boards, those are identical to the bill as you've passed it 2 years ago now.
Thank you.
Okay, the only other person signed up to testify in favor is Lanny Hartman. Lanny, take it away. You've got 2 minutes. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Lanny Hartman. Electric cars are coming, and for many, they're already here. The question is, where do you charge? Most of the time, it's at home. I met someone a few weeks ago who told me they were looking at getting a Tesla Model 3 because his condo association was working on putting in EV charging stations. His condo board realizes that if they have EV charging for their residents, it will make their community more modern and boost property values. Not every condo board or HOA sees the value of letting their residents install charging equipment. This bill creates a framework for guiding that process. Thank you for considering this legislation. I think it will help many Maryland residents who want to drive electric but don't have a home with a garage. I urge a favorable report on House Bill 110. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this witness? Seeing none, and there's no opposition. So let me double check. Yep, no opposition. So thank you very much. That ends the public hearing on House Bill 110. We'll proceed to House Bill 248. Delegate Shetty, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Vice Chair Stein, members of the House Environment and Transportation Committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify in support of HB 248, which will prohibit a common ownership community from restricting residents from engaging in composting practice. This bill idea came from a constituent who lives in a common ownership community that's located in my district, and he was actually prohibited by his HOA from placing a small composting bucket the size of a large paint bucket onto his balcony. As members of this committee are aware, composting is a practice of diverting certain organic yard waste and food residuals that can be safely decomposed either in an individual's yard or in a composting facility like the Premier facility in Prince George's County. Some individuals who engage in composting do so in their backyards, and they follow certain best practices to mitigate unwanted pests, but others, like myself and my constituent referred to earlier, hire a commercial compost pickup company like District 18-based Compost Crew to pick up our compostable materials weekly. Food waste is the largest component of waste in municipal landfills. 30% of food is wasted globally across the supply chain, and it contributes 8% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. So in 2018, there was a Washington Post article that actually noted that if food waste were a country, it would come in third after the United States and China in terms of the impact on global warming. What this bill does is it prohibits a common ownership community from restricting residents from engaging in composting practices, whether by following best practices in backyard composting or hiring a commercial compost pickup company to pick up weekly residential compost. What it does not do is require individuals or HOAs to compost. It also does not provide any state or local funding for composting. The bill takes inspiration from existing law that was passed 12 years ago in 2008, which restricts with limited exception common ownership communities from prohibiting residents from installing solar panels. Since that law passed, the adoption of solar panels on homes across the state has significantly increased. Maryland now has a solar capacity of 1,293.9 megawatts as of 2019, which ranks us 17th nationally for solar installation. Adding composting to the 2008 law will further assist Maryland in reaching our climate change policy goals. Local jurisdictions save significantly by incentivizing composting. Per Montgomery County's DEP director, it costs $47 per ton to Montgomery County to dispose of garbage in a landfill versus $35 per ton for recycling, and it could either break even or potentially even generate revenue for a jurisdiction if they are able to incentivize composting instead. Anything the state can do to incentivize composting and remove barriers to engaging in it will help Maryland reach our climate change goals while saving our local government's money. Respectfully, I request a favorable report on HB 248. Thank you.
Terrific. Any questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, let's proceed to, only 2 people are signed up to testify, and they're both in favor. Nobody's opposed. So Adam Ortiz and Ava Richardson in that order. Adam, you out there?
I don't have either one of them available in the waiting room.
Okay, that ends the public hearing. Thank you very much, Delegate Shetty. That ends
Thank you.
the hearing on House Bill 248. Let's proceed to House Bill 19. Delegate Holmes.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's good, good to come before you this afternoon. House Bill 19 is only a clarification bill. Unlike the legislation that I had several years ago relevant to ground rents, which were established in the summer of 1632 by King Charles I. There was a bill passed in 2019 that left a loophole, and HB 19 is a bill to close that loophole. When a person who is in a real estate transaction, they provide down payment or earnest money deposit, for example, to a broker, a real estate broker. There are laws on the books that tell the broker what to do in case that deal falls apart. In addition to that, there are laws on the books that describe what happens if a title insurance agent, a title insurance company has down payment money or earnest money deposit. Unfortunately, the courts have not yet clarified their opinion on what should happen if an escrow agent has earnest money or down payment monies. And therefore, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, this bill, HB 19, directs everyone in terms of what must happen in a transaction for earnest money deposit or down payments if an escrow agent holds that money and makes the escrow agent held liable, or same rules and regulations like a broker or a title insurance company. With that, Mr. Chair, I will conclude my testimony. Thank you very much.
I think that makes it sufficiently tedious for nobody to want to ask a question, but let me just run it by the committee. Anybody?
That was clearly my point, Mr.
I thought so. William O'Connell, who was signed up as written only, is in the waiting room. Did you intend for him to testify, or is he here just to answer questions? What do you?
They are favorable, and if you would allow in just a couple of minutes, Mr. Chair, I certainly would appreciate it.
Sure. Okay, Mr. O'Connell, you've got 2 minutes to testify if you like. You can, of course, always avail yourself of the option of using fewer than 2 minutes, but go for it.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great. Thank you, Chairman Barve and distinguished committee members. As you know, I'm Bill O'Connell. I am the chairperson of the Legislative Committee for the Real Property Section of the State Bar. I'm also the past president of the Maryland Land Title Association. As Delegate Holmes just told you, this is really just a cleanup bill. It's designed to carry out really the purpose of the law that was passed in 2019. Unfortunately, when it was put into practice, problems were discovered, and this really is designed to clarify what is exactly needed. So the original statute talked about what we thought was they were describing one thing with three things: a deposit, additional deposit, and down payment, are really different things. Actually, two different things. Deposit and additional deposit is all deposit. But a down payment is different in that the seller has no right to it unless the transaction closes. Whereas a deposit or an earnest money deposit, that is placed in escrow so that the buyer has some stake in the game and gives the seller comfort that they're serious. The idea is to have a written agreement as to what to do with that deposit. And that was really the purpose of the statute. So all we're trying to do here is tailor the statute to its intended purpose. And that's all I got. I'll answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Delegate Otto has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the gentleman just answered my question, and I have full confidence in the sponsor of the bill that he's doing the appropriate measures. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That ends the public hearing on House Bill 19. We'll proceed to House Bill 313. Delegate Holmes again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I appreciate this opportunity. This bill sounds familiar to you, like so many others that were taken up earlier in the session. This is a reserve study bill. Reserve studies are funds that are put aside in a common ownership community to take care of issues for replacement, not maintenance, replacement items, like a roof, for example, on a condominium. We had this bill before us twice last year. One was a statewide bill, of which this is again. The other was a Prince George's County only bill. The Prince George's County only bill passed last year, and because the session was cut short last year, the statewide bill did not get passed. Since last year, another jurisdiction, a neighboring jurisdiction to Prince George's County, was fearful that a statewide bill again for reserve studies would not be approved for whatever reason. So they, Montgomery County, just initiated their own reserve study bill. So this year, again, we're going to see two bills coming through. One is a Montgomery County bill. Obviously, I'm not the sponsor of the Montgomery County bill because I don't live in Montgomery County, which was passed by the Montgomery County jurisdiction just recently. And in front of us now is the statewide bill. And again, I'm asking for a favorable recommendation on this. There are some small amendments to this bill, which the subcommittee will discuss, Mr. Chair. And quite frankly, the small amendments to this bill were a very, very wise recommendation by the Montgomery County delegation in terms of the review of the reserve study bill in the 5-year time period. And the subcommittee will discuss that amendment, Mr. Chair. And with that, I will close my testimony.
Okay, any questions for the sponsor? Delegate Otto, do you have a question or you just forget to put your hand up feature down? Okay, I'll go to Delegate Terraza.
I forgot to take that down.
Okay.
But I would ask the chairman of the subcommittee what this is doing different than what we have been trying to do, or
there is no difference in the intent of this bill versus this year versus the intent of the statewide bill last year, or what was passed by the Prince George's County last year, or what was just passed by Montgomery County this year.
All right, and this is the statewide bill?
Yes, sir, that is correct. This is the statewide bill, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Delegate Terraza and Wyville in that order.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Delegate Holmes just answered this question, but I missed it. You said it did pass this committee last year?
No, the Prince George's County only bill passed.
Oh, this one didn't.
Yeah, the statewide bill got cut short, got caught up in the session last year, terminating early.
So just remind me what happens when you don't have a reserve analysis. Does the community have to, in the end, something needs to be done, then do they have to specially assess their community and basically place a tax on their community last minute?
That's a perfect question. What this bill does is to completely circumvent the statement that you just presented. Right. A special assessment is put onto common ownership community owners when they don't have sufficient funds for reserve study. Not only is a special assessment added to the common ownership community owners, but also if you don't have sufficient reserves in your common ownership community bank account, you could be prohibited from getting a loan to sell that unit. So this reserve study serves multiple purposes, one of which was the primary question that you had about special assessments. This bill circumvents the need for special assessments.
So that's one of the reasons this is so important.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Delegate Wyvil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Delegate, for bringing forward the bill again. Can you remind us what last year's bill number was?
I cannot. I'm a little bit older than you, young man, and I'm a little bit long in the tooth and short in the memory. I'll find it out for you.
All right, if you can get that to me, I appreciate it. And then secondly, I know the cost of these reserve studies can be rather expensive, as we talked about last year. Does the bill provide for any exemptions for smaller associations?
There's one. Let me take your first statement first. The amendment that we will be discussing in subcommittee was an amendment that was put onto the Montgomery County bill. And that amendment made it clear that subsequent reserve studies after the initial one are updates of the reserve study bill. And the reason why it was that update language, the word update was not in the original bill was because I made an assumption that it was understood that after the initial reserve study bill was done, updates would follow, and therefore it would not be as costly as the initial bill. But that word update will be more clear in the amendment. And there is no restriction on the number of units because we have found that, number one, in the smaller communities, the initial reserve study is significantly less than what a larger community would have to provide funding for. That's number one. Number two, we've also found that the smaller communities are the ones most liable in not having reserve studies. And therefore, the special assessments are more likely in the smaller communities, and therefore making the common ownership community owners in the smaller communities, more susceptible to the financial repercussions thereof.
Are there any requirements on the qualifications of those performing the reserve studies? Can they be done in-house by the smaller communities? Because obviously they can identify what needs to be done and get estimates on what can be fixed, or does it have to be done by a certified professional?
It has to be done by a professional. And let me tell you why I put the requirements for a person or an entity providing a reserve study is listed in the bill in a very specific and succinct manner. The reason why I was very specific in putting the requirements into the person or the entity providing the reserve study is because there are national standards for persons doing a reserve study. And there are certain things that a person or an entity that they look for and assigning the useful life of something in a community. And most likely the persons that have the specific expertise in preparing reserve studies would have the understanding of what a useful life would be. As an example, if I could just take what I think you might be suggesting and expand upon it. If you, for example, as a very good accountant and living into your community, look at your common ownership community driveways or parking areas, you would say, I think that parking lot might have to be repaired in 15 or 20 years. Whereas a reserve study specialist, which is identified in the bill, might say, no, Mr. Wyvil, although you're a very good accountant, that parking lot needs to be replaced in 5 years, and you need to have funds in your bank account to replace in 5 years, not 15.
All right, thank you. I'm sure we'll have more discussion in subcommittee.
I'm sure we will.
Delegate Parrott.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman of the committee. Dr. Holmes, Delegate Holmes, good bill. I did find the previous bill's year, it was HB 1054. So HB 1054, if you want to see last year's, that's what it is. And I guess a quick question, it sounds like you'd have to have a professional person, like you were just talking to Delegate Weibel, come in and provide this assessment. About how much would that cost?
Good question. I have received estimates for the initial reserve study bill to be somewhere between $1,500 and $4,000, depending upon the size. Between $1,500 and $4,000. And again, obviously, the larger they are, the more complicated that they are. So between $1,500 and $4,000. Now, that is why, again, in the that's the initial study. Studies done 5 years after that would not be as expensive because those will be update studies.
And what did I know this in the bill, I'm sorry, I didn't read this part. Is it every 5 years that they have to do this?
That is correct, every 5 years.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, any questions for the sponsor? If not, we'll proceed to the only other person signed up as favorable with amendments, Bob Enton with the Multi-Housing Association. Bob.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
I can.
Good. I'd like to say hello to the members of the committee. I think this is my first time appearing before you this year. And on behalf of the Maryland Building Industry Association, which is the statewide association for residential builders. And we are signed up with favorable amendments. We've had some conversations with the sponsor about this. You have a copy of our written testimony and our amendments. And our concern is that, this is an across-the-board bill that basically applies to all condo associations and homeowner associations where there are more than 20 units or 20 homes. And we just think that there needs to be some consideration of what the stage is for the development, who owns the common areas, what repairs have to be made, as far as whether or not you have to have a study. And so we look forward to bringing these issues up in with the subcommittee and discussing them with the sponsor and the members. I think last year we really didn't have a problem with the bill, but I think as we took a look at it this year, we do have some concerns.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Enton? Well, seeing none, thank you very much. That ends
Thank you.
the hearing on House Bill 313. We'll proceed to the last tedious homes bill of the afternoon, House Bill 361.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'll be here all week.
Make sure you tip the wait staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Marvin Holmes. This bill is relevant to training of board members in common ownership communities. And this bill, quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, was a request to me by organizations, common ownership community board members from across the state. I'm sure most of you recognize that, being chair of housing and real property, I get calls from everywhere from Ocean City and Charles County and everywhere else. One of the things that is on everyone's mind in terms of board of directors is training. And so this bill is a mandatory training for those who are on the board of director or officers of common ownership communities. Now, I know some of you may perhaps have a knee-jerk reaction to mandatory training on volunteers in an organization. I want to take a pause, have you take a pause for a minute though, and let me explain to you why I think this is necessary. When board members are trained, there is less likely that there will become problems with the management of the common ownership community. There are cases which were brought by the Attorney General's office last couple of years where property managers, for example, had the opportunity to steal millions, plural, dollars from common ownership communities, primarily because the board members did not understand what their rights and responsibilities were. And some of the common ownership community property managers took advantage of that. And these millions of dollars have, as I'm being made aware, not yet been returned. This requires a common ownership community administration, so to speak, to provide, requires training from a common ownership community organization. Now, currently there are 2 common ownership community organizations within the state. There's Montgomery County has the oldest one, and Prince George's County has another one. Both of those organizations provide training for board of directors, and it's free. There is another organization, the CAI, Community Association Institute, which also provides board member training. Now, CAI's training does have a cost associated with it, but there are other organizations like the Maryland Homeowners Association, for example, that is preparing themselves to provide training also. That's what this bill is, Mr. Chair. I look forward to taking some questions.
Okay, any questions for the sponsor? The Vice Chair has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Delegate Holmes, I certainly like the concept behind your bill. And I asked this question only somewhat tongue in cheek. And I guess my question is, I remember the thick book of laws concerning condos and co-ops and HOAs that at one point was distributed to members of the Housing Real Property Subcommittee. So I guess my question is, board members wouldn't have to review that, would they? Because I think otherwise they might run screaming from the training.
Actually, no, the board members would not have to review this book, Mr. Vice Chair. But I'll tell you that the requirements for training are taken from this book, and the training of both the Montgomery County and the Prince George's County CCOC is about 2 to 3 hours or so. And there are another series of training, but none of the board members would have to memorize this book like I have.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Delegate Otto, and then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need to unmute.
You're good. We can hear you.
You can hear me?
For once, we can hear you.
You can't go ahead and mute. You can't go ahead and mute yourself, though. That'd be probably much better.
How does the Montgomery Village and the Columbia Foundation or Association come in on this?
Columbia, I don't recall. either one of them, to tell you the truth, Delegate Otto.
Usually they just want to be excluded, so.
Yes, and now I will find out for you. I don't recall off the top of my head, but I will find out for you.
All right. Well,
I don't see Paul Taberzi anywhere, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, it must not be too important then. Thank you.
Delegate Harrison.
Yes, thank you. Delegate Holmes, should this bill be enacted, then I guess who will reach out to all of the common ownership communities to let them know that upon election that individuals have to complete this training?
Good question. The persons that primarily reach out to the board of directors throughout the state or Prince George's or Montgomery County typically are the property managers. Let me give you an example. When the Prince George's County Reserve Study Bill was enacted last year, there was a series of emails and letters that went out by property managers who managed properties within Prince George's County, alerting the board of directors that there is new legislation requiring the reserve studies. The same thing happened when the insurance rate went from 5,000 to 10,000. The property managers sent the information out to the board of directors, and that's how the board of directors of the common ownership communities were notified. In addition, there are also other jurisdictions, other methodologies of information. For example, I mentioned the Montgomery County CCOC, Prince George's County CCOC. They sometimes distribute information to all of the HOAs and common ownership communities as well. So that's how the word gets out.
Okay.
It's been pretty effective thus far.
Okay. So you had another piece of legislation that dealt with the registration or the certification of management companies. So if the management companies are not necessarily certified, are they in fact registered some kind of way as a management company, as opposed to just going down to Staples and getting a business card, as I remember you saying? And, you know, and so if they're one of those type of management companies, then chances are they may not get the information that's necessary to share with their communities. Would that be a correct assumption?
Well, I would submit that there's always an opportunity for new laws to slip through the cracks of those that it mandates. So there's always that opportunity for a new law to slip through the cracks. But in a typical scenario, like I said, the property management companies do notify the board of directors for the companies, for the common ownership communities that they manage. Now, since you mentioned all of those organizations that go to Staples, I want you to stand by, because there will be another hearing for property managers to be licensed in the future, the very near future, okay. I may add.
Okay, one other question. So does this legislation mandate how those or where those board members would get their training?
The bill specifically states that the training should be, the board members should take the training from a common ownership commission recognized by the state or local government.
Okay.
And again, there are a multitude of them, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, once again.
Wait. Kumar, I put up a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Delegate Holmes, I was wondering if you had an opportunity to think about the discussion we had a week or so ago about the size of these homeowners associations or condo boards. Is there a difference in the definition of homeowners association or condo board as far as the training is, or both of them considered needed to be trained?
I did have the opportunity to think about our discussion, Delegate, and I appreciate that discussion early on. I really believe, however, that no matter the size of a common ownership community, everyone should be trained. After our conversation, I had a conversation with the homeowners association, which has 14 units in it, 14. Mm-hmm. And they are woefully neglect in their management of their HOA, to the point where their roads are collapsing, and within another year or so, I'm sure that they will not even be able to get into their units because they will have no access to it. That was the factor that made me think that no matter the size, every board member needs to be trained.
Okay, so is there anything in the legislation that would address an inability of the condo building or the people that are in the condo to be able to get enough people to serve on the board?
There are other regulations that stipulate what happens when the required number of board members are not active in a common ownership community. Other parts of the law talk about that particular aspect. This bill does not.
Yeah, I just wonder, I guess my biggest feeling is wondering how this will affect the condo units in resort areas and in places like Ocean City where people tend to only be there in the summer, or, you know, they have board meetings and maybe it's twice a year. And that's probably the extent of what they do. I'm just a little concerned about getting people to lend themselves to serve and to be trained.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's just isn't that so?
Yeah, and I do appreciate your concern, and obviously we'll have lengthy discussions about this in our subcommittee when it takes place, and we'll have additional talks.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and it's worth taking it for a ride, right?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you.
Okay, Delegate Parrott and then Delegate Talisi in that order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Delegate Holmes again. It's an interesting bill. Delegate Clark did bring up some of my concerns. It can be really hard to get people to serve on a homeowners association like just ours. We have 119 homes, and the same board members are doing it now for, I think, the third year in a row. It seems like this would just put another barrier to make it harder for people to want to serve on that. I just wanted to get your response to that.
And I understand that completely, which is why I kind of drug my feet on putting this bill in for so many years, because I understand that concern. It's difficult enough to get persons to volunteer their time, and now I'm asking I'm asking them to get educated, and that does, in some cases, cause an additional concern. The reason why I am still a strong advocate of getting the persons on the board trained is because I have seen firsthand across the state what happens to these common ownership communities when the board members are not trained. And so I still believe that the training outweighs what happens when they are not trained, which is why I'm still going to be an advocate for the legislation. But I do truly understand the complications that you and Delegate Clark are expressing.
Thank you.
Delegate Talisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is not directly related to the bill, but HOAs. Can the sponsor remind me how many votes do we need in an HOA to pass or make any changes to the bylaws? Do we have a state requirement? Like a percentage of votes?
In terms of each HOA, your question is specific to HOAs. Each HOA is governed by their specific documents. There is, if you look at the specific documents, it tells that board what their requirements are for their governing body.
No, but in case there's nothing in any bylaws, like there's no specification of how many votes are needed, does the state or the county at any level say what's the percentage of people who need to vote?
I'll take a look at it and see if there is something statewide that requires that.
That'd be, thank you very much. I
Sure,
appreciate it.
sure.
Delegate Boyce.
And this is a quick reflection. Delegate Holmes, would you agree, or would you say that individuals who would then now train would then be more comfortable potentially serving on a board, because it kind of takes the pressure off of not knowing and having to quote unquote find it yourself versus being trained feeling able to do the work, and therefore not only serving well, as you said, without these kind of nuances and mistakes, but would then open up the door for other individuals to potentially be on the board, knowing that there would be training.
I appreciate that. And you are 100% correct. Training is more advantageous. And also in addition to the persons, the board members getting trained, they also are made aware of where to get additional information to make them even better board members, and how to assist. Part of board member training is how to assist in getting their neighbors involved as well.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, there appear to be no further questions. Let's go to Bob Etten, who is again testifying on behalf of Maryland Multi-Housing, and I suppose also the Building Industry Association. Bob.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Robert Enton on behalf of the Maryland Building Industry Association. You have our written testimony. We have two very simple amendments, which we hope the committee will consider and adopt. I think as members of this committee know, and I know Delegate Holmes understands it very, very well, is that when a project is new, a development is new, whether it's condos or homeowners, basically under Maryland law, the developer maintains control of the board of directors and appoints those members. When the property gets up to the appropriate percentage, then that board then they relinquish their control of the board, and the HOA or the condo association then puts the members on the board that they want, and they control the board of directors. So the First Amendment would just make it very clear that this doesn't apply prior to a common ownership community's transfer the board of directors controlled by the developer to a board of directors controlled by the unit owners, rather than the developer. The Second Amendment would just make it very clear that this title applies to residential for sale housing, housing that is for residential housing that's for sale. And with those two amendments, we'd be absolutely fine with the bill and would support it. Thank you.
Can I respond, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Enton. And yes, I do think that those are great amendments, and we'll take those. We'll discuss those in subcommittee. Most of you know that in a previous life, I was the developer who put these things together prior to them being sold. So I understand how developers put these documents together, and I agree with Mr. Enton. So we'll discuss these in the subcommittee, but I think these are pretty good amendments, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Clark has a question.
Just a question on Mr. Enton's amendments there. When you said it would apply to residential places that are for sale, then Marvin, would that make a difference in how it is interpreted for second home rental units?
Well, second home, no, because the board of directors in most cases are the owners, not the tenants.
Well, yeah, but he said residential units. Wouldn't there be a difference between residential units and temporary or, short-term rentals? Wouldn't there be a difference?
No, we're talking apples and oranges. And we'll how about if we discuss that offline, if you don't mind?
Okay.
That'd be great. Thank you, sir.
Okay, that appears to conclude the public hearing on House Bill 361. Thank you, everybody. Let's go to House Bill 50. I believe this is a reintroduction of a bill we passed last year, and I would point out that no one is signed up in opposition. So with that, Delegate Stewart, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Delegate Vaughn Stewart, this is HB 50. The good news is this is very straightforward. The bad news is I don't have any props like Delegate Holmes used. So this bill, the Tenant Protection Act, is basically an omnibus set of renter protections. Other than some technical amendments we'll be pursuing in subcommittee, the bill is in the identical form that unanimously passed the House of Delegates last year. Just very briefly, I'll run through what it does. First, It extends existing lease termination protections for victims of sexual assault and domestic violence to victims of stalking. Second, it gives certain qualified professionals the authority to determine if a tenant is injured by sexual assault, domestic assault, or stalking. So in other words, rather than just the court system or police officers, it would allow social workers and therapists, as long as they're certified, to also verify those things. Third, the bill would mandate more transparency from landlords using a ratio utility billing system. Fourth, the bill would compel landlords withholding any part of the security deposit to provide, where practicable, some supporting documentation. And finally, the bill grants tenants the ability to use community spaces within buildings for the purpose of organizing tenants associations once a month. So the bill is big and it's complicated, and it took a lot of work to get into good shape. So I just want to thank all the renter advocates for their support, former bill opponents like AOBA and MMHA for working with me on the amendments, and also Matt Michler and the drafters, and to Delegate Holmes for his work last year, our last session in subcommittee. So yeah, in summation, I think the 5 provisions proposed in the bill would offer common sense safeguards to make life a little bit easier for renters, and I urge a favorable report.
It appears Delegate Otto has a question for the sponsor. Charles, you need to unmute yourself if you intended to ask. Yeah.
I have intended to ask, and can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, Delegate Stewart. Was this a bill we saw last year? Is that?
Yes, it is a reintroduction of basically an identical one. You voted for it. It was HB 744 last year.
And changes?
The only changes are technical. Just a few drafting changes that the drafters notified, but no substantive changes.
All right. Thank you for bringing it forward again.
Thank you, Delegate Otto.
Okay, Delegate Lehman.
Thank you. And I do remember this bill, Delegate Stewart. It is excellent. And kudos to you for the additional work you've done on it. Quick question about the victims of stalking and domestic violence. Does that also include folks who are a victim of other kind of violence by, random people they don't know? Or is it just meant to be, kind of like a partner, intimate partner, people that they do know? Does it cover random acts of violence?
So right now in current law, you can break your lease early if you're a victim of domestic violence, which tends to be obviously someone you know, of course. Sexual assault, which could be a stranger or someone you know, of course. And this bill would extend it to victims of stalking, which is oftentimes someone you don't know. But if you've been, for example, punched on the street but not stalked thereafter, then this bill nor current law would provide any protections for early lease termination, because it would not be sexual assault. It would not be domestic violence in case it was from a partner, and it would not be stalking unless stalking resulted thereafter.
But okay, quick follow-up. But it could not be could it be grounds for lease termination if someone was assaulted in their unit by someone they don't know? Could a landlord use that as an excuse to terminate someone's lease?
If that would go to the lease, that would go to the within the 4 corners of the lease. If someone's assaulted in the unit, it could arguably be because they're engaging in illicit acts and they've broken the lease, and the landlord could try to evict them. But again, we're not talking about evictions here. We're talking about breaking the lease early if the tenant's having difficulty. Certainly, tenants can be assaulted in buildings, and then they can allege that the building is not being kept safe or locked by the landlord in violation of the lease. But that is a separate part of the law and not what we're discussing in this bill.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay, any further questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, let's proceed to the first witness signed up in favor, Carissa Hatfield. Carissa, welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Barve, members of the committee. I'm honored to be here today to testify on behalf of House Bill 50. I am currently a housing attorney with the Homeless Persons Representation Project, where I have had the honor of representing survivors of domestic violence and housing related issues. I do also have unique experience prior to this as an attorney who represented survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking in protective order proceedings throughout various jurisdictions in Maryland. The legislation that's being proposed here today in House Bill 50 is very important for a number of reasons. I want to focus on why the opportunity of a qualified third party to provide a report is a significant part of this bill, simply because of the experience that I have. Why is this provision helpful? Having worked with survivors of domestic violence for many years, I can tell you that there are many individuals who are survivors of these crimes who may not feel comfortable seeking a protective order for various reasons. Some of them may include that their perpetrator is a member of law enforcement or the legal community. They may not feel safe going to court, or they may choose to drop a final protective order in interest of receiving a more favorable arrangement for custody with their children. These are just a few of these reasons. And if a survivor in that circumstance is working with a medical professional, a psychologist, or a licensed social worker who can give information that the protective order could provide, or could be even provided even better, I believe that we should do that and give survivors an opportunity to live safely and comfortably where they need to. For this reason, we would urge a favorable report on House Bill 50, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next, Zafar Shah. Zafar.
Good afternoon again. Chairman Barve, Vice Chair Stein, and members of the committee. My name is Zafar Shah from Public Justice Center, the civil legal aid organization. We provide assistance to renters throughout the state. We echo Delegate Stewart's recap of this bill and also co-sign on Ms. Hatfield's testimony about the provisions on early termination. I just emphasize that to Delegate Lehman's question, we're not talking about terminations pursued by the landlord, but rather early terminations initiated by a tenant for special reasons. This bill has been well crafted, streamlined compared to the Tenant Protection Act that you saw last session and passed after abundant amendments. This bill is really about 4 parts, which Delegate Stewart recapped. And although it's 15 pages, it's easiest to read this bill as just those 4 parts: the early termination provision, a utility billing provision, the right of assembly for tenants associations in their buildings. These are all, and additionally, the security deposit provision, which requires documentation but does not change interest rate or the 45-day time period for release of the security deposit. So these are really either tweaks or salutary measures to improve law. On the utility billing issue, I do want to stress that because allocated utility bills are not based on residents' own use of utility, they're subject constantly to the scrutiny by tenants, and they must rely on information from the landlord. And this bill provides real sunlight and transparency measures, but the purpose of them is to allow tenants to understand bills through documentation at any time, not simply just within a few days of billing. Many disputes occur about ratio utility months, weeks and months after a bill was received. We urge a favorable report on the bill. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Zafar. Next, Greg Countess is here on behalf of Maryland Legal Aid. Greg.
Mr. Chairman, how are you today? Members of the committee? Great. I'm Gregory Countess, and as the chairman said, I'm a lawyer at Maryland Legal Aid, and we're here urging this committee for a favorable report on House Bill 50. This is a bill that is truly important to augmenting a tenant's right to quiet enjoyment of the premises. And I'm not going to go through all 4 sections that's in our written testimony, but I'd like to emphasize just a point. that hasn't been made here today, and that is the right of a tenant council to be able to assemble in a common space area that's provided by the owner. Back in 2019, I had an opportunity to go over on the Eastern Shore to speak to tenants who were in some, had some concern. They lived in an elderly and disabled building. The building had numerous code violations, including mold. The floors were uneven, which was particularly dangerous for folks who were disabled or aged. And the building, which was protected by restricted covenants in terms of the rent, keeping it affordable, it seemed as if those protections would go away. And those tenants were not able to meet in their building. And it was just fortunate for them that they were able to meet in a public building a half a mile down the road. And it's through that meeting that they were able to engage both with the owner and with the state to get funding provided by the state to take care of those conditions and to maintain the character of the building. And for that reason, this is very important to Maryland tenants. And again, we would urge a favorable report.
Okay, I think that is everybody who's just testifying in favor. So are there any questions? Okay, seeing no questions, the final witness is Aaron Greenfield, who signed up favorable with amendments. Aaron.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Aaron Greenfield here on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association. I want to thank the sponsor. He really did do a great job in working with all sides, and we're here favorable with amendments. You have my written testimony. They are very specific to the RUBS provisions on page 4, and very specifically line 1. We're not clear on what a statement that identifies the elements that compose the landlord's utility charges means. We're not clear on what the elements mean. So we're seeking some definition on that. Secondly, lines 12 and 13 on page 4, it is really hard, in fact, impossible to get meter reading dates. And as this committee knows as well as any, certain jurisdictions are more challenging than others in dealing with water meter reading. And so our members have tremendous challenges with that. So we ask that that language be line 12, including through and including dates, including meter reading dates and billing dates. We simply just don't know when that occurs in certain jurisdictions. And then lastly, we're asking that in lines 16 and lines 28 that it's made clear that this information from the landlord to the tenant is provided within 7 days from the date that the landlord provides the tenant the bill. With that, we respectfully request a favorable report with those amendments. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Greenfield? Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 50. We will proceed then to the last, I think the last bill of the day. House Bill 104, Delegate Stewart.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair and Mr. Vice Chair. For the record, I'm Delegate Von Stewart, and this is HB 104. So the pandemic has exploited a disastrous loophole in our housing process. So evictions were halted by both the federal government and the state government during the crisis in a variety of different ways, mostly through the use of affirmative defenses, so not straight moratoria. But one way that landlords can and have subverted this rule is simply by declining to renew an individual's lease. And so landlords can still displace tenants and have increasingly used that loophole throughout this crisis just under a different name. It's no longer called an eviction, it's just declining to renew someone's lease. Oftentimes during this crisis, because they weren't able to pay their rent regularly because of some sort of COVID-related loss of employment or loss of income. And it's my position, and this bill's sort of undergirding, that tenants should, at the very least, be provided sufficient time to find new housing. And so HB 104 is very simple. It extends the amount of notice a landlord has to give a tenant before declining to renew their lease, and it provides, therefore, more time for a tenant to find new housing. Moving is difficult. No one likes it. It's tough. And so basically what the bill says is that tenants who have lived in their homes for fewer than 2 years would receive 60 days notice before their lease is not renewed, up from 30 days. Though I will note that in Montgomery County and Baltimore City, they already require 60 days notice. So for those tenants, there would be no change. Tenants who have lived in their homes for 2 years or more, however, would receive 90 days notice under this bill. And the rationale behind this bifurcation is pretty straightforward. Long-term tenants who have lived longer than 2 years have more roots in their community, in their building, in their home, in their neighborhoods, and they're also less experienced with securing new housing. Ultimately, the last thing Maryland needs right now is more of its citizens living on the street. But this bill is really a small measure, a common sense approach that just provides tenants a little bit more time to figure out their living situation before potentially facing homelessness. These changes are simple, they're straightforward, they're based on the laws of many other states that already provide this much notice. And it's my view that, if landlords are not going to renew the leases of vulnerable tenants, and I understand in a lot of cases why they wouldn't, the least they can do is provide them fair warning. And so because Marylanders should not be thrown into homelessness with just 30 days notice, I urge a favorable report.
It appears that Delegate Holmes has a question for the sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Delegate Stewart, for bringing this forward. The question I have is relevant to after a lease has reached its expiration period, the lease automatically goes to a month-to-month lease. So how would your bill affect the criteria for a month-to-month lease? What would happen then? I haven't read the bill, I'll admit, but you could address that, I appreciate it.
That is a great question. It would not change the month-to-month lease timeframe for notice, which is currently 1 month. It would not change that provision. It would only, this bill, the increased notice would only apply to lease terms longer than month-to-month.
Okay, any other questions for the sponsor of the bill?
And I guess I would just add, Mr. Chairman, too, there are also week-to-week tenancies, as I'm sure Delegate Holmes is aware. There are week-to-week tenancies. Similarly, those are unaffected. The notice for a week-to-week tenancy is 1 week. Okay. We're not changing that.
Okay. First person signed up in favor of the bill, Zafar Shah. Zafar.
Well, good afternoon again. Thank you, Chairman Barve, members of the committee, and thank you to Delegate Stewart for bringing forward this bill. This bill is not a just cause bill. It doesn't change the fact that lease terminations can occur for no reason, but it importantly provides time for renters, as Delegate Stewart mentioned, and especially for our clients at Public Justice Center for lower income households, workers, our Marylanders with disabilities. Time is everything when it comes to housing. And I just want to present you a short story of one of our clients. This is also submitted in our written testimony. But during this pandemic over 2020, we had a 67-year-old client. She was a pre-K teacher, lost her job early in the pandemic. And she was already living paycheck to paycheck, month to month in her home where she had resided for 17 years. And as this pandemic came down on Maryland, she told us at PJC, quote, "I don't have internet in my house. I'm not good with computers. I've gotten some advice about applying for food stamps and unemployment insurance, but it's going to take a while. In the meantime, I haven't had any income for over a month, and I don't know when I will. And the landlord just sent me a notice to vacate." And this is at a time when our state is stumbling to stand up an emergency unemployment compensation program, rental assistance programs, energy assistance programs. And at that time, I think it was clear time was not on the side of countless Maryland households. And the fact that Maryland allows landlords to end tenancies on 30 days notice only compounds the threat of dispossession felt by struggling renters. And so this is, of course, not a pandemic bill, but it's inspired by, I think, the understanding that whether it's a sudden illness or injury, a death in the family, or an unforeseen loss of benefits, a 60 or 90-day notice under HB 104 really helps. It alleviates pressure, and we strongly seek this a favorable report on HB 104. Thank you.
Thank you. Gregory Countess with Maryland Legal Aid.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, again. Again, Maryland Legal Aid would ask this committee to pass favorably upon this bill. We believe that it's an important step toward advancing the state of Maryland toward what we believe is its obligation in regard to both international law, human rights law, toward the human right to housing. And I would echo the comments made by Mr. Shaw and simply point out another sort of facet of this particular problem about tenants having enough time to be able to move. Most of this committee is aware of the fact that there's an affordable housing crisis in the state of Maryland, actually throughout the country. And that crisis has become worse in the midst of this pandemic. And as a matter of fact, using the Maryland Department of Housing Statistics Consolidated Plan for the 2015 to 2020 year, they found that the 277,965 families were paying more than 30% of their income in rent. And there's another of that group, 470 of those families are paying more than 50% of their income for rent. So if you have a 30-day notice, that shortens the time period for folks, even if they wish to move, to be able to find a place that's affordable. As Mr. Shaw noted, time is everything to these tenants. And if we want to, this bill is a step, maybe not a big step, but a important step toward providing peace of mind to residents so that if they have to move, they'll have a little bit more time to be able to secure their housing and not become homeless. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then finally, before we hear Aaron Greenfield and Bill Costelli, Carissa Hatfield.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee once again. My name is Carissa Hatfield with the Homeless Persons Representation Project. I think one of the things that's become clear from Mr. Shaw and Mr. Countess's testimony is this is impacting a significant number of residents, this issue of non-renewal. And even before COVID, which has amplified the situation, we had tenants who were going through this very thing. So I do want to share the story of one of HPRP's clients who experienced a similar issue. Rebecca is 58 years old. She's disabled, a grandmother. She lived in her home in Baltimore City since 1995, had developed significant ties to her community, had raised her 2 children to adulthood in that home. And last year, in January of 2020, a new landlord purchased the property and advised Rebecca that she would have 30 days to vacate because they needed to make repairs to the property. Rebecca had lived in the neighborhood for 25 years, had significant ties and support systems as well as medical providers in her community. And finding new housing in that short of a time frame after 25 years would be challenging for anyone, but was significantly more challenging for Rebecca as she has a Section 8 voucher through the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. House Bill 104 would help to create a larger time frame for tenants like Rebecca to find housing that would be suitable to their needs. For Rebecca, her disability, and within her community, that would be appropriate for her to live in. And giving that time frame just a little bit more time creates opportunities for tenants to maintain safe and stable housing. And that is why we would urge a favorable report on House Bill 104. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a couple of questions, first from Delegate Jalisi and then from Delegate Otto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question was just for clarification. What I heard the sponsor say was that this bill is not going to make any changes in the notice requirement for tenants who are on a month-to-month lease. And my understanding was that for people who are on an annual lease or some other type of lease, especially annual leases, there's automatically a 90-day provision in case the landlord does not wish to renew the lease for another year. So are they saying that the 90-day provision for lease renewals in case of 12-month leases is going to change to the time period depending on the period of tenancy of a tenant? Because they're also saying that it's not going to change for month-to-month tenants, which is 30 days in Baltimore County and 60 days in Baltimore City. So I'm just trying to understand what is it changing if we already have 90-day notice requirement for annual leases and they're not changing anything for month-to-month leases.
Who'd like to take a crack at that?
So I can take a crack at it. I believe I understood the question, Delegate Jalisi. So just to clarify again what the bill does, so month-to-month tenancies and week-to-week tenancies, farm tenancies are not altered. But if you have an annual lease and you have lived in your property for fewer than 2 years, your notice would go from 30 days to 60 days, unless you live in Baltimore City or Montgomery County, in which case your notice would go from 60 days to 60 days. There would be no change. And for tenants who've lived in their apartment or their homes for 2 or more years, their notice would increase from 30 days or 60 if they live in those two jurisdictions to 90 days. And those are the only changes in the bill.
So that's where I'm getting confused. Most of the leases that I have seen, whether they are created by the MRIS or another agency, they automatically have a 90-day notice requirement for annual leases.
So
I'm saying that there are other jurisdictions where it's not 90 days, like Montgomery County, Prince George's County, some other county are signed. It's a 90-day.
Go ahead and let Delegate Stewart answer.
Yeah, so you cut out a little bit, Delegate Jalisi. I think I understood the gist of your question. So it is true that in some standard leases that I've seen, notice is provided up to 90 days. And I think, kudos to the landlords that have standard leases with that much notice. But the reality is, and I'm sure that the, landlord advocates on the call would attest, is that that's a minority of the leases in the state have that much notice built into the lease.
But what you're saying is there's no state law which mandates it. So
no, not at all. State law mandates 30 days. Correct.
Okay.
And again, how much does it mandate? 30 days?
Yes, the state law currently mandates 30 days.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Delegate Otto. You need to unmute yourself, Charles.
I need to figure out that space you talked about.
It's a good trick.
Well, my concern is, how about the mortgage payments on these this affordable housing that the landlords have there, and what time do they get, and are we going to give them benefits for a reasonable amount of time to accommodate for a pandemic? And it seems to me there's been a substantial individual income influx from the federal government to individuals, and did they pay the rent or did they not? Or where's the we want affordable housing, but somebody's got to build it and pay for it. So
Yeah. Well, thank you, Delegate Otto. Yeah, and I'll just say that, it's true that the federal government has pumped a lot of money, and the state has too, localities have too, into rental assistance. I think rental assistance is something that helps both landlords and tenants in terms of what remedies are available for landlords, and especially smaller landlords who, of course, have been struggling as well during the pandemic. I would just note that I actually have a bill that involves the mortgage foreclosure process. It's unfortunately not going to this committee, so y'all won't hear it. But one thing that it's taught me is that the process for foreclosure is actually a much longer process. And no matter really what piece of the puzzle you're talking about, homeowners get way more time currently to try to resolve any sort of mortgage process than this 30-day notice would be for tenants for lease non-renewal. So small landlords, if they're hurting, they do have a myriad options available right now to get through it, including generous forbearance relief that goes up to 12 months.
As an aside, Maryland mortgage holders pay slightly higher mortgage rates to accommodate the fact that it takes 450 to 500 days to foreclose on a property. So there is a cost that everybody shoulders for that. Any further questions for the witnesses in favor of the bill? If not, we'll proceed to Aaron Greenfield, who signed up favorable with amendments. Aaron.
Good afternoon again, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Aaron Greenfield here on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association. Here favorable with amendments. Again, we would thank the sponsor for his time and willingness to hear us out. I will respectfully disagree with him. I think good landlords not renew for legitimate reasons. And those reasons, as Ms. Hatfield pointed out, could be renovations. It could be a resident who, in fact, has failed to pay for their rent. There could be a resident who's broken their lease on multiple occasions. So there are legitimate reasons to not renew. But at the same time, as you've heard, at least in Baltimore City and Montgomery County, we're already subject to local laws requiring the 60-day notice. So we come here with a couple technical amendments, specifically on page 4 in line 21 and in lines 21 and 23 and to 24 rather, we would like to strike the term or the language of the current year. We're not really sure what that means before the expiration of the current year of the tenancy, and it's not consistent with additional language in the bill. And then lastly, again, for purposes of consistency on page 4 in line 12, we would suggest striking 2 months and putting 60 days, which would be consistent with Montgomery and Baltimore City law as well. And on page, line 15 on the same page, striking 3 months and substituting 90 days again for consistency purposes. And with that, Mr. Chairman, we are favorable with those amendments. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Greenfield? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to hear from Bill Castelli, who's signed up in opposition to the bill. Mr. Castelli, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to testify and would like to have an opportunity to talk to the sponsor too. We did read some of the language in the bill to extend even from the month-to-month lease from a 30-day notice to a 60-day notice. And what we're really concerned with, most of our members obviously represent the smaller landlords who probably are renting a single-family property. And what we're concerned about is that they do end up in situations where they are also experiencing financial difficulty. And just to illustrate that, we had one property manager working with a member of the military who was actually not even interested in renting a property, but ended up due to transfer duties, had to rent the property and wasn't really making enough in rent to cover the full mortgage payment. And then when the tenant got behind because of financial trouble, he ended up being $12,000 behind in paying the mortgage, which he had modified, but then was prevented from seeking forbearance because of the modification. So, he ended up in a pretty serious financial difficulty. And, we can argue about whether 1 month to 2 months is a big change, but when you're dealing with a mortgage payment, that can add up quickly, and a month or 2 months can make a huge difference. So that's our concern, and happy to talk to the sponsor some more about that. But we do think that the current law provides flexibility. It gives notice, and certainly most landlords will work with the tenants when they have that flexibility to give them even greater notice than what the law provides. So for that reason, we're opposed.
Any questions for Mr. Castelli? Okay, seeing no questions, that ends the public hearing on House Bill 104, and that ends the public hearings for this afternoon. I have a few announcements here. We're going to be voting as a committee on Friday. My leadership team and I will meet Wednesday after the public hearings. And we'll, in anticipation of that voting session. And it's my hope again that we can move as quickly as possible bills that passed the House of Delegates last year and ran out of time because of COVID-19. So any announcements from any subcommittee chairs first? Any announcements?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Jim.
The Natural Resources and Ag Subcommittee will meet at 4:45. That's in like 10 or 12 minutes. All right.
Okay, Ag and at 4:45. Anybody else? Any other announcements? Any announcements from non-subcommittee chairs? Okay, well, that looks like it's a wrap for today. See you guys tomorrow.
Chairman Barve?
Oh, yeah.
Did Delegate Lehrman announce her subcommittee? Land
No.
ethics?
No. I mean,
Yeah, she's not on the meeting. Okay, we'll put it on the hearing schedule when she comes up with the time.
okay, just look out for it, gang. Okay, see you soon.